Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the shadowy, dust-covered corners of royal history, where the splendor of gilded thrones meets the undignified thud of awkward exits. Picture it now, silk robes rustling in echoing marble halls, golden chamber pots glinting beside ornate four-poster beds, and monarchs meeting their ends in ways that feel more like punchlines than pageantry. So, before we get too far ahead, go ahead and give this video a like and hit that subscribe button only if you truly enjoy what I bring you each week. I appreciate every bit of support. Drop a comment too, and let me know where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Are you curled up in bed? Sitting on a train? Burning the midnight oil? I love knowing who's out there on the other side of the screen. Now's the perfect moment to dim the lights around you, maybe turn on a soft fan to give you that gentle background hum, and get yourself comfortable. We're about to glide back through time together. Yes, you heard that right. This isn't one of those majestic tales of gallant last stands on the battlefield or noble sacrifices for the crown. No, not tonight. Tonight's tale is about how even the most powerful kings and queens can shuffle off this mortal coil in the most head-shaking, face-bomb-worthy fashion imaginable. What you're about to hear are stories that strip away the velvet and jewels to reveal something deeply human, and often hilariously unfortunate. Tales where royalty meets their untimely fate in places like outhouses, pastry buffets, and duck ponds. The takeaway? Even if a crown glitters in candlelight and gemstones shimmer with regal weight, they don't come with a guarantee of grace in one's final moments. Dignity, it turns out, is entirely optional. You might assume that being royal means your death will be something to sing ballads about, epic, legendary, full of solemnity and splendor. But you'd be wrong. Very wrong. What we have tonight is less tragedy and more chuckles. It's more a soft, comedic nudge than a mournful requiem. And here's your early warning: if you were magically dropped into the era of powdered wigs and chamber orchestras for just one day, you probably wouldn't make it through the combination of sky-high egos and absolutely atrocious medieval plumbing. Our first stop, Kensington Palace, London. The year is 1760. The reigning monarch of Great Britain and Ireland, King George II, begins his day not with a grand trumpet call or royal salute, but with something far more mundane: a painfully full stomach. At 76 years old, George is bald on top, fussy in temperament, and famously grumpy before his morning meal. As the king slowly stirs beneath his heavy, brocade-stitched bed covers, your own eyelids might feel heavy too, imagining the cold stone floor beneath his slippers and the weight of age pressing on his joints. He stretches, grumbles, and eventually rises, wrapped in an embroidered nightgown that would put most modern loungewear to shame. He shuffles off toward his private closet. Now, in 18th century parlance, the term closet doesn't mean a wardrobe for royal regalia. It's a far more delicate way of saying toilet. Inside this lavishly appointed room sits the close stool, a piece of furniture that resembles an armchair but hides a more functional surprise beneath its velvet cushion: a porcelain chamber pot. There's no plumbing to speak of, only the muffled, awkward symphony of royal relief playing out behind gilded doors. You might try not to imagine it, but at this point it's far too late. The picture has already formed in your mind. And now comes the part no royal biography ever quite glosses over. Midway through what can only be described as a rather intense moment of gastrointestinal release, George lets out a low groan and slumps forward. He collapses instantly. His ever-dutiful valet, posted just outside the door, perhaps nose-wrinkled in olfactory despair, rushes in, only to discover the monarch motionless, his nightgown disheveled, his royal person slumped, and whatever remained of his dignity very much left behind. The official cause of death: a ruptured right ventricle of the heart. Medically speaking, it was a natural cause. But the context is important. This occurred during what court physicians would later refer to with hushed tones as a bowel movement of vigorous effort. In simpler terms, the king quite literally died on the toilet. And as undignified as that sounds, it's backed up by modern science. Studies have shown that straining during defecation can sharply elevate blood pressure, particularly in the elderly. One academic paper even labels toilet strain as a surprisingly overlooked contributor to fatal cardiac events. So yes, let's be perfectly clear. King George II died while trying to poop. Let's not dress it up with royal phrasing or imagined solemnity. It was as ignoble as it sounds. To this day, historians debate whether George had experienced chest discomfort in the days prior, or if his famously fiber-rich diet of oatmeal and dried royal figs played a more direct role in this final act. The royal kitchen, it seems, was generous with the roughage. Perhaps too generous, and the aftermath? It was a public relations disaster cloaked in royal silence. For all his authority and lineage, George's death quickly became fodder for satire. One biting poet published a piece that quipped the king ruled with a loose tongue and an even looser gut. Harsh? Certainly. But such is the peril of becoming a punchline when your final throne isn't carved of gold, but porcelain. For those wondering about the next steps, the doctors performed an autopsy and confirmed the extent of the damage. His heart had not just torn slightly, it had fully burst. This was not a metaphor. It was a literal rupture. His heart was then removed and placed in a separate ceremonial urn, in keeping with royal burial traditions. While customary, this act adds a strange sense of posthumous indignity. It's one thing to die on the toilet. It's another to be buried in parts. Oddly enough, George's demise did leave a subtle mark on palace routines. After this incident, there was a noticeable uptick in royal physicians taking digestive health much more seriously. Quiet consultations were held. Diets were reconsidered. And somewhere deep in the halls of Buckingham Palace, it's possible a discreet plaque now reminds future monarchs to take their time, breathe deeply, and not, under any circumstances, push too hard. Your eyes may be growing heavy now, lulled by the soft glow of the screen and the hum of nighttime air. But we're far from finished. One king has fallen. 19 more monarchs and their memorably absurd misfortunes are waiting just ahead. Stay tuned. The forest smells of rain and moss, wet bark, crushed leaves, and something older still, a scent that clings to ancient roots and rotting stumps, like the breath of time itself. You're in Denmark now. Late 1800s. The kind of autumn afternoon where the sun barely slices through the dense canopy above, filtering down in streaks of hazy gold through branches twisted like arthritic fingers. Everything is damp. Not just wet, but deeply soaked, as if the entire forest has been steeping in silence. And aside from the occasional rustle of wind through the leaves, it is eerily, oppressively still. Until that stillness breaks, hooves. Fast. Close, the rhythm of galloping hammers across the underbrush. Mingled with the sharp crack of branches snapping under pressure and the distant, breathless shouting of someone not accustomed to being ignored. The voice is shouting in Danish, urgent, sharp, and unmistakably aristocratic. Crown Prince Friedrich is on the hunt, you hear him before you see him. His voice cuts through the forest like a blade, frustrated, imperious, and just a shade theatrical. Friedrich adored the hunt. More than politics. More than diplomatic receptions. Possibly more than the throne itself. This wasn't a man content to pose beside neatly arranged piles of pheasants while artists captured his best angle. Friedrich craved the chase. The raw danger. The pulse-pounding rush of control teetering on the edge of chaos. His quarry today? A red stag. Enormous. Towering. Its antlers arched like a bone-spun chandelier, tangled and majestic, heavy with power. Local gamekeepers had tried, gently, to advise against this particular pursuit. One of them, red-faced and nervous, muttered that the beast was unusually aggressive, unpredictable even. Another whispered that it had gored a rival buck clear through the chest and left the carcass where it fell. Still another, emboldened by ale and folklore, swore the stag didn't fear men. It remembered them. But Friedrich wasn't interested in caution. He dismissed the warnings with a wave of his gloved hand. He rode out anyway, his boots polished to a mirror shine, his saber gleaming beneath his cloak, and his ego puffed up like a canvas balloon ready for liftoff. His hunting party trailed behind in various states of forced enthusiasm, their smiles growing tight and their eyes quietly scanning for escape routes. Most of them were just hoping the day would end with a roasted feast, not a royal funeral. The prince pressed his horse harder, mud spraying from under the hooves as they barreled through the tangle of trees. He darted between trunks like a man convinced of his invincibility. Which, if we're being honest, is a delusion many heirs to power share. The hoofbeats rumble in your chest like distant thunder. The hounds are baying, their cries frantic and raw. The stag is near now, its crashing progress just ahead, a comet of muscle and antler tearing through the forest's green hush. Then the rhythm changes, the stag stops, abruptly. As if turning a page mid-sentence, no one sees it coming. Least of all Friedrich, the animal doesn't bolt. It turns, it faces him, its chest rises and falls like bellows. Its nostrils flare. Clouds of hot breath puff into the cool air. And for one charged, breathless moment, there is a frozen tableau, prince and beast, staring one another down like dueling monarchs. Nature's nobility versus man's. Then the stag lowers its head, and charges. It is terrifying. Swift. Absolutely silent in its commitment, the prince barely has time to gasp. His horse rears, startled. He loses his grip. The world tilts. Friedrich crashes to the ground, his body slamming against root and stone, armor clanking like dropped cutlery. He tries to rise, too late. The stag does not hesitate. With surgical precision, it slams its antlers into him, hooking his side and lifting him clean off the ground, a ragdoll caught in a cruel dance. The force is sickening. The impact final, the scene unravels in a blur of shouting and panic. The royal party erupts. A scream tears through the trees. A rifle goes off, belated, inaccurate. The stag, as if bored, vanishes. One moment it's there, wild and red and alive. The next, it is gone, absorbed back into the mist and myth it came from. Friedrich lies where he fell. His limbs twisted. One arm flung wide. His finely stitched tunic soaked and torn. Blood pools beneath him, seeping into moss like spilled wine. He blinks slowly. His lips form shapes. "Tell my father." He breathes. But no one catches the rest. The forest swallows the words. The royal physician arrives in a breathless flurry of silk and foolishness, clutching a satchel of smelling salts and a pocket Bible, but no real tools. They try everything. Leeches. Bandages. There's a heated debate about cutting open the wound to let the evil humors escape. It's gruesome and futile. Some historians say he bled out internally. Others insist it was the bumbling treatment that sealed his fate. One notably bitter scholar once wrote, "The stag killed him with antlers. The doctors killed him with ignorance." He doesn't die quickly. Hours pass. The adrenaline fades. The pain numbs. His breathing grows shallower, slower. His eyes drift upward, watching the canopy as it sways gently above him. They say he didn't weep. But just before the end, he murmured something else. "I had him." Not regret. Not apology. Just defiance. Word spreads quickly, as it always does when the mighty fall. The Danish court reels. Mourning begins. Ribbons pinned. Velvet shrouds unfolded. A marble bust is ordered. Symphonies commissioned. But behind the heavy doors of aristocratic salons and smoky parlors, the story changes tone. Some call it a tragic loss. Others, with a dry chuckle, call it hubris. One wry noblewoman refers to him as the antlered martyr. And then there's the cousin, every family has one, who insists on recounting the tale at every gathering for decades to come, complete with theatrical gestures and unsolicited impersonations, and the stag, captured. Eventually. It is not killed, oddly. Instead, it is housed in a specially fenced glade within the royal park. For 12 more years, it lives under watchful eyes, hand-fed by servants, stared at by schoolchildren and foreign dignitaries alike. Locals start calling it the ghost of the prince. Tourists toss apples over the fence. A few swear the stag watches them back. Some say it nods. One child, overwhelmed by the weight of myth and imagination, faints when it snorts. There is no plaque. No official mention of the prince. Just the animal, regal and silent, a living reminder that titles don't stop hooves, and lineage won't shield you from the wild. You sink deeper beneath your blanket now, your breath slow and steady. The scent of pine lingers at the edge of your thoughts. You can almost feel the weight of wet velvet, the sting of cold air, the rush of heartbeats that believe themselves immune to consequence, and maybe, just maybe, that's what this story has been trying to tell you all along, whispering like wind through branches. The forest does not recognize crowns. The trees don't salute. The animals don't kneel. Out here, every prince is just another creature crashing through the underbrush, loud, clumsy, and terribly, beautifully mortal. You're still half lost in the hush of the forest, its silence thick like fog, when the scene begins to transform. The shift is gentle at first, almost imperceptible, as the damp, earthy scent of leaves gives way to something warmer, more fragrant, flickering candlelight casting soft halos on polished silver cutlery. Without fully realizing it, you've been transported to Stockholm, Sweden. The year is 1771. The setting is sumptuous. The mood carries an air of celebration, though it feels strangely strained beneath the surface. The dining table stretches on absurdly long, a gleaming river of porcelain and gold-threaded linen. At the head of it all sits King Adolf Frederick, if his name doesn't ring any bells. Don't worry. You're in good company. Adolf Frederick was never the sort of monarch whose memory filled statues or epic ballads. He wasn't a warrior king, nor a masterful politician. He served more as a ceremonial figure, a placeholder on the throne during an era when real authority resided with the Swedish parliament. But tonight, on this particular night, Adolf is determined to carve out his own legacy. Not in the annals of governance or war, but in the strange and strangely human arena of indulgence. It's Shrove Tuesday, the last glorious night before Lent. Traditionally, it's a time to feast, to fill the belly before the long abstinence begins. A holy excuse, one might say, to pretend for an evening that the laws of digestion have been temporarily suspended. And the king? He takes this notion to heart in the most literal, unapologetic way imaginable. You watch as a steady stream of servants drifts into the hall, gliding like phantoms in starched white uniforms, each balancing trays stacked precariously high with the richest dishes the Swedish court can muster. The air is heavy with the mingling scents of butter, brine, cream, and spice. Eel stew, thick and glossy. Pickled herring, glistening in tiny silver curls. Lobster tails drowned in golden butter. Veal steeped in cream, the sauce pooling like silk. Smoked sausages coiled in elegant spirals. It's a parade of decadence, a grand choreography of abundance, and King Adolf? He does not hesitate. He eats. His guests, caught somewhere between awe and horror, exchange glances across the table as the king clears dish after dish with almost mechanical determination. His powdered wig droops ever so slightly each time he bends forward to seize another bite. There is no grace in it, no regal performance of restraint, only the unflinching resolve of a man intent on proving something. His appetite seems to swell beyond mere hunger. There are the faint sounds of satisfaction, and also, unmistakably, small, polite burps that echo off the vaulted ceilings, punctuating the meal with an odd kind of dignity. Then, dessert arrives. This is not just a course. It is the climax. The grand finale. His favorite, semla. A traditional sweet wheat bun, split open and lovingly filled with rich almond paste, then topped with an airy swirl of whipped cream. Lovely on its own. But this being Sweden, and this being the king, the semlor are not served dry. They are each placed in individual bowls of warm milk, turning them into hetväg, a comforting, soupy delicacy somewhere between pudding and bread soup. The king doesn't eat one. He doesn't even stop at 3 or 5. He eats 14 buns. 14 bowls of hot milk. 14 moments of sugar and starch and dairy melting into one another. Each bite a soft, dense mass of sweetness, warm and heavy and impossibly filling. It is culinary overkill, both absurd and mesmerizing. Historians have debated the reason for this gluttony ever since. Some suggest it was a kind of farewell to indulgence before Lent, a final plunge into pleasure. Others propose it was an ill-advised act of bravado, spurred on by a French ambassador's snide remark about Swedish moderation. One theory, quietly floated and never proven, is that the king was simply in low spirits that night. Feeling the weight of age, perhaps, or loneliness. Maybe he sought solace in the soft, sweet buns of his childhood. Emotional eating, royal edition. And honestly, that feels very human, but regardless of the cause, the outcome is heartbreakingly predictable. Within hours, King Adolf begins to feel unwell. Not just the usual bloated discomfort that follows a large meal. This is something else entirely. His body rebels. Waves of pain ripple through him. He starts to sweat. His breathing becomes labored. The discomfort that began in his gut spreads upward, outward, everywhere. It consumes the room. Servants rush to summon the royal physicians. Aides begin fanning him, whispering in hushed tones. Curtains are drawn. Candles are lowered. Someone brings mint water in a crystal goblet, as though a few drops of peppermint might undo what 14 buns and an entire banquet just inflicted. It's futile. The king does not recover. Sometime in the night or perhaps in the very early hours of the next morning, Adolf Frederick dies. The exact moment his heart gives out is uncertain. The royal physician, writing with unsettling calm, later declares that the cause was a digestive failure following a heavy meal. Which is, to put it gently, an understatement. Modern experts believe it was likely acute indigestion or possibly a stroke brought on by the sheer burden of consumption. One autopsy report notes, with clinical coldness, intestinal swelling of unusual magnitude. For all its detachment, the phrase paints a vivid and unfortunate picture. The saddest part? There's no noble ending here. No inspiring last words, no courageous struggle against fate. Just a man, a king, who ate too much. A life brought to its final, painful pause not by revolution, not by poison or intrigue, but by desert, and still, the Swedish people did mourn him. In their own way. Adolf had been seen as gentle and affable, someone more relatable than regal. He laughed too easily, petted too many palace dogs, and never quite managed to embody the distant grandeur expected of a monarch. They gave him a nickname, the king who died from a meal. It rolls off the tongue more elegantly in Swedish, perhaps, though not by much. Even now, he's remembered for it. Each Shrove Tuesday, some Swedes jokingly call the holiday Fettisdagen med Adolf, Fat Tuesday with Adolf. Bakeries sell extra buns in his honor. Schoolchildren snicker at the story, wide-eyed and delighted by the idea of a king meeting his end by semla. In Gothenburg, one ambitious bakery once attempted to build a 14-bun tower to commemorate the event. It collapsed moments after completion. Your own stomach shifts just thinking about it. You imagine the dim glow of candle flames flickering against gold-rimmed glasses. The rising heat from too many bodies packed into a hull. The thick air of indulgence. The clatter of silver, the low hum of conversation, the steady sound of one man chewing his way into legend. You hear it, the scrape of chairs, the ring of spoons, the final, exhausted sigh of a king felled not by enemies, but by excess, and there is something unmistakably human in that, because in the end, Adolf Frederick's death is not just an embarrassment. It is a shared truth. A strange, almond-scented parable. A warning wrapped in whipped cream. Proof that even those crowned and robed, even those raised above others, are still ruled by one universal law: the stomach has its limits. You feel your own breath steady now. There are no lavish meals here. No eel stew or semla waiting on a gold tray. Just quiet. Just blankets pulled close around your shoulders. Just the calm that comes from knowing, for tonight at least, you are safe from your own appetite. Outside, in the far and snowy distance, a hush falls over the land where a king once ate himself into history, and the snow keeps falling. You drift now to the French Riviera. Cicadas chirr softly in the late summer dusk, the air heavy with the mingled scents of orange blossoms and engine oil. The year is 1927, a time of shifting boundaries and gathering momentum. The world is changing rapidly, with jazz music pouring from grand hotel lobbies, telegrams clattering across oceans like mechanical whispers, and revolution looming at the edges of every imaginable horizon. But for this moment, none of that matters, because in front of the Hotel Negresco in Nice, France, a woman is standing with her back to the sea, tying a long, fluttering scarf around her neck. Her name is Isadora Duncan. She is not a princess by birthright or by blood. There is no lineage of royalty behind her, no ornate crown resting on her brow, no ancestral castle bearing the family name. Yet despite all that, she was called a queen. A queen not of state, but of spirit. A queen of dance. A living goddess of movement and sensation. The barefoot high priestess of modern expression. Wherever she went, controversy followed her like a spotlight, always trained on her every step. Her choreography rejected the rigid, rule-bound world of classical ballet. Her political views caused polite society to clutch its pearls. Her love affairs were so volatile and impassioned that Russian poets found themselves weeping into their vodka glasses, and she savored it all. She fed on the drama. It was her air, her rhythm, her language. Tonight, she is radiant. Not young anymore, certainly. Her face bears the faint traces of time and heartbreak. But still, she glows with that unmistakable, theatrical magnetism that turns heads and silences conversation. She wears a flowing tunic styled after ancient Greece, a shade of ivory that catches the warm evening light. Her lips are painted a defiant crimson. And around her neck she wears the scarf, famous even before it would become infamous, a massive, vividly red strip of silk, hand-embroidered with delicate patterns in shimmering gold thread. It had been a gift from a young artist in Paris who told her, eyes wide with sincerity, that it would bring her luck. It trails behind her now, catching the breeze like a banner. Or a warning: she's about to take a simple drive with a man named Benoit Falchetto. A French-Italian mechanic and automobile enthusiast, Falchetto owns a sleek, speedy Amilcar CGSS Roadster. The car is open-topped, low-slung, and barely wider than an elegant bathtub. It's impractical. Dangerous even, but that only delights Isadora more. The thrill of it excites her, and then you hear her final words. They seem plucked from the script of a grand melodrama, flamboyant and chilling in equal measure. Farewell, my friends. I go to glory. The car leaps forward, the scarf, seized instantly by the rushing air, lifts into flight. It dances behind her in long, graceful arcs, a ribbon of red threading through the twilight. Then it happens, a moment so sudden, so violent, it almost escapes the eye entirely. The silk coils backward, caught by the machinery. It wraps around the spinning rear axle of the car. The fabric tightens in an instant, transforming from soft adornment into lethal snare. She is yanked violently from her seat, her head slamming into the side of the vehicle. Her neck breaks with a sickening crack. Death is immediate. It is silent. It is grotesquely swift. The driver, oblivious for a few seconds, continues onward until the roadster rolls to a gentle stop. Then confusion sets in. A scream cuts through the evening air. Someone collapses in shock. The hotel valet rushes toward the scene but halts in horror when he sees what has become of her. There, seated as if resting, is Isadora Duncan. Her head droops at a terrible angle. Her body remains upright, almost composed, while the scarf that had moments before fluttered like wings now winds tightly around the axle of the car, fluttering faintly as if refusing to be still. Historians still debate the mechanical details. Was it the wheel? The spokes? The open chain? Some say the scarf caught around the hubcap, others the drive shaft. A few whisper theories that question whether it happened quite like this at all. Perhaps the story has been reshaped by time, twisted by retelling, exaggerated by the feverish press. Maybe it's apocryphal. But Isadora herself had always lived between truth and myth. And myths cling to irony the way silk clings to the breeze. Still, the autopsy told its own story. A fractured cervical spine. Unconsciousness before she even knew what had happened. Death arriving within seconds. There was no time for a dramatic gasp, no final speech, no curtain call. Only a quick, brutal punctuation to a life lived in passionate italics. The world reacted with a blend of grief and disbelief. Newspapers seized upon the story, their headlines wild and grotesque. Scarf strangles dancer, death by fashion on the Riviera, curtain falls for dance queen. Tabloid illustrators published ghastly caricatures, including one in France that imagined her ghost rising theatrically from the wreck. Scarf still tangled around her throat. In the United States, some journalists suggested her death was divine punishment for her radical politics. In Britain, critics tooted about the perils of flamboyant clothing and modern excess. But among the noise, a few voices, mostly poets, spoke softly of what had truly happened. The universe had chosen to meet genius not with grace, but with a cruel, precise jest. One piece in a Berlin magazine quoted Isadora herself, recalling that she had once told a friend, "I hope when I go, it will be swift and theatrical, preferably during movement." The universe had listened, and obeyed, but what lingers, more than the headlines or the outrage, is the terrible perfection of it all. The woman who gave the world a new way to move died in the moment her own body was stilled forever. The scarf she wore as an emblem of freedom became the rope that bound her. The car that was meant to carry her onward pulled her irreversibly backward, and even now, you wonder. Was it truly an accident? She had been grieving, deeply and endlessly. Years earlier, both of her beloved children had died in a car that careened off a Paris bridge into the Seine. Their loss fractured her in ways she never fully revealed. Since then, she had often spoken of destiny, of signs, of the ways the universe whispered warnings or invitations. That scarf was more than a fashion choice. To her, it was both armor and provocation, and yet, the world laughed, not out of malice. Not with joy. But with a helpless, nervous kind of laughter. Because how else are we supposed to react when something so wild, so poignant, and so unspeakably absurd unfolds before us? They cremated her body and placed her ashes in Père Lachaise Cemetery, in Paris, among playwrights and painters and musicians whose echoes would outlast their bones. Her epitaph is simple. No reference to cars, or scarves, or the twist of fate that took her. Only her name. A date. And a silence so vast it feels like a stage left unlit, yet her death still surfaces in conversation as a kind of tragic punchline. A story too ironic to believe, too poetic to forget. A joke spoken in the language of silk, shadow, and the cool hush of midnight jazz, and you, lying quiet now, picture that last moment before it happened. The wind skimming over her skin. The scarf catching light and air like a flame. Her heart wide open, eyes lit with that ancient defiance. 1 second later, all gone. Not because of some lesson. Not because fate needed to teach anyone anything. But because sometimes, the things we wear and carry with us carry us too. Farther than we meant. Faster than we feared. Tighter than we could ever unwind. The wind outside your window hums low and steady now. You reach for the blanket and pull it up gently. No scarf tonight. No roads waiting. Just this stillness, earned by surviving the motion. Sleep hovers at the edge of your thoughts like soft silk, and somewhere beyond the veil of dreams, Isadora Duncan twirls once more. You slip gently from the gleaming Riviera into the velvet shadows of Renaissance France, into a world of echoing stone corridors and heavy velvet drapes, where tapestries flutter against ancient walls and perfume struggles valiantly, but unsuccessfully, to mask the ever-present musk of bodies, ambition, and secrets. The air is heavy tonight, steeped in the moisture of a humid summer evening that seems to cling to the skin. It is sometime in the mid-1500s, and you find yourself quietly positioned in a lesser-known wing of a grand French chateau. This is no ceremonial chamber. No throne room lined with nobles and trumpets. This wing has witnessed more whispers than proclamations, more rendezvous than rituals. And far more undressed truths than clothed pretenses. The scene tonight is entirely private. Intimate. Improvised, like a poem whispered behind closed doors. The hallway is dimly lit by flickering sconces that cast unsteady shadows across the wooden floors. The hush of silk against polished boards is the only sound besides your own breath. The air itself carries a strange intensity, thick with the aroma of aged wine, melted candle wax, and something else too. Something raw. Something restless. A tension built from anticipation so intimate it borders on sacred. At the center of this quiet storm stands King Henri II of France. He is in his 40s now, a man still striking in appearance. With the rugged kind of handsomeness that comes not from youth but from power, from experience, from the unwavering confidence of someone who has spent decades bending the world to his will. His shoulders are broad, his posture proud, his mustache immaculately maintained. There is an ease in his stride that reveals just how little he fears being caught. After all, he is the king. But this, whatever this is not official. It is not royal, not sanctioned by advisors or scribes. It is not his palace, nor even his bedchamber. This is the private estate of a noble woman whose name is known in court circles, whispered with both admiration and envy. She is a patroness of the arts, a lover of poetry and sculpture, and, on evenings like this, a patron of the king's far more corporeal desires. Henri is not alone, there is laughter coming from behind a closed door. It is soft and low and full of heat. Breathless laughter, shared between two people who are no longer discussing matters of state. It is the kind of sound that reveals much more than it conceals. Clothes are already undone. Perhaps discarded entirely. The conversation has long since abandoned diplomacy or decorum. You have seen the portraits, the oil paintings hanging in museums with their stiff poses and velvet robes. But those do not show you this. They never show you this. What happens in the private chambers and hidden corridors of monarchs rarely survives the canvas. Tonight, Henri makes his way through a passage behind the grand hall. It is one of those ancient architectural features designed for discretion and secrets that only castles and cathedrals seem to possess. The ceiling is low and the walls glisten with the faint sheen of damp stone, a lingering testament to the chateau's age. The path is narrow, cool, and cloaked in silence. Yet the king presses forward with purpose. The woman who waits at the end of this secret path is worth the inconvenience, he believes. Worth the risk, and then, suddenly, the detour becomes the destination. Historians have long debated the exact sequence of events, as they must when royalty dies under less than dignified circumstances. What remains certain is this: Henri too was engaged in a private encounter, likely in the middle of it, when he collapsed without warning. A cerebral aneurysm struck with merciless finality, bringing down the king in a tangled heap of royal flesh, powdered wigs, and unfulfilled intentions. There had been signs. Some claim he had complained earlier that week of persistent headaches, a building pressure behind the eyes, moments of dizziness when he turned too quickly. But no one dared suggest he rest. No one dared advise against pleasure. Henri was not a man to be warned, and certainly not a man to be denied. He had followed his desire faithfully, and it led him straight to this ending: the woman whose identity has been delicately redacted or altogether erased from most official accounts screamed for help. Desperation echoed through the hidden chamber. But it took time. Precious, costly time. Time to explain to confused guards what room she was in. Time to retrieve the king's garments. Time to make the scene more presentable before any attendants were permitted to enter. Time to pretend this never happened, even while it was still happening. By the time the royal physicians arrived, the damage had already been done. He was transported back to the palace with great urgency, his body limp, his breathing erratic, his face drained of all its usual composure. His blood pressure was soaring. For days, they bled him with leeches. They wrapped his head in damp poultices of lavender and vinegar. They prayed in trembling Latin over his unconscious form. And yet, nothing worked. He drifted in and out of lucidity, never fully returning. 10 days later, Henri too was gone, and this is where the story acquires its most exquisite layer of discomfort. The official cause of death was softened for public consumption. The announcements declared it a head injury or a sudden illness brought on by strain. Some whispered of a horseback accident, a dignified fiction for the sake of legacy. But behind velvet fans, behind closed doors in the servants' quarters, the truth moved like wildfire. The King of France had died with his pants down. The phrase became a kind of inside joke, repeated with sly smiles in foreign embassies and murmured among chambermaids. One English ambassador wrote, without a hint of restraint, that France's lion has died in a closet, not a coliseum. His letter was promptly censored, his wit preserved only in private archives. There is irony here. A tragic, fitting irony. Henri had always been a man preoccupied with image. He was the sort of monarch who paused mid-battle to straighten his collar, who insisted on being painted with falcons he had never trained, and who issued decrees about the proper placement of chamber pots when foreign dignitaries visited. He built his legacy on appearances, on control, on aesthetic elegance. And yet, in the final tally, all that careful dignity came undone in the most undignified way in a borrowed room, his cheeks flushed with exertion, and likely with one boot still strapped to his foot. Some records claim the incident left his mistress traumatized, retreating from public life for years. Others insist she emerged more powerful than ever, leveraging the scandal to extract wealth and security from a suddenly vulnerable court. But the truth, as ever, is blurred. Scandal does not leave behind clear footprints. Especially not when kings are involved. There is no plaque commemorating the site. No ribboned velvet rope around the quiet, unmarked space where a monarch fell. No guided tours speak of this room. Only a forgotten footnote in French royal history, sometimes softened for polite conversation, but always present in the background. The tale of the king who died while, shall we say, indulging in a particularly persuasive form of diplomacy, and you exhale quietly, almost reverently. The torchlight fades a little, casting long shadows that stretch down the empty corridor. The air is warm, but not stifling now. Just old. Heavy with memory. Somewhere, moths spiral and fall, drawn to the remaining light. The chateau exhales with you. Its walls still breathing with the heat of centuries past. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders. It feels like a shield against the story, or perhaps a way of holding it tighter. because if there is one truth to carry out of this soft, forgotten corner of royal history, it is this: power does not always vanish in a clash of swords or a stroke of law. Sometimes, it slips away quietly. Without fanfare. Behind a locked door. With no one to witness the final fall, save a lover, a hallway, and a pair of stockings forgotten on the floor. The stone corridors of France dissolve like mist, fading gently from your sight, and you find yourself transported to another place entirely. The air grows heavier, damper, tinged with something ancient and close. You are standing now in a vaulted chamber cloaked in dimness, where every surface glistens with beads of moisture. Steam rolls across the room in slow, sinuous waves, veiling the space like a living breath. It curls around the arches and pillars, clings to marble walls, and pools languidly near your feet. Somewhere nearby, barely visible through the vapor, a fire crackles beneath a polished copper tub, its reflection dancing along damp stone. Low-burning candles flicker, their flames stretching long and thin as the heat thickens the air with water and something more elusive. Something heavier. There is an edge to it, not quite definable. It clings to the senses. It smells of rosemary crushed by warm palms, of rose oil steeped in ancient copper. But beneath those perfumes lies a darker trace. Something uneasy. Something not meant to be named. This is not the setting of a royal spa day. Not in the way you might imagine. You have arrived in Hungary, in the year 1514, and the woman who steps into this chamber tonight is no ordinary bather. She moves with purpose, with the weight of lineage and power. Her name, whether whispered or written, carries both reverence and fear. Ursabet of the Bathory bloodline. A countess of unmatched wealth, a noblewoman tied by blood to kings and queens. Her will is law. Her word is followed. But for all her influence, she is not untouchable. Not here. Not tonight. Time has played tricks with the details. Generations have bent the story like softened iron. Some suggest this woman was not the infamous Ursabet Bathory herself, but a younger cousin, a lesser noble born under the shadow of that dreaded name. Others remain firm in their belief that it was indeed the Countess. Ursabet in all her cold splendor, which, if true, would bend the entire timeline and drag this story toward a darker, bloodier end. Yet for now, one truth remains: a high-born woman, cloaked in the trappings of privilege and ceremony, entered her bath chamber on a night riddled with thunder and wind. She did so in the company of her handmaids, women chosen for their discretion and silence. She passed through heavy doors. And she never emerged alive. You see her now. Watch her closely. The Countess moves slowly, gracefully, lowering herself into a tub filled with scalding water. Her breath escapes her lips in a quiet sigh as the heat climbs against her skin. This was not unusual. Among the upper echelons of nobility, it had become fashionable to bathe in water nearly at a boil. They believed it expelled toxins, rebalanced humors, encouraged fertility, and restored youth. The physicians spoke in confident tones, but the reality was often more dangerous than divine. Fainting was common. So were nosebleeds. Still, vanity had its price, and women like Ursabet were willing to pay it. The candlelight trembles. Shadows ripple across the walls. Her handmaidens murmur softly in Hungarian, their voices cautious and careful. One of them, barely more than a girl, approaches the fire and tips a heavy iron kettle into the bath, sending up a plume of fragrant steam. The scent of lavender floods the air, pungent and cloying. Too rich. Too thick. The Countess inhales deeply, but then falters. Her cheeks flush a deeper crimson. Her lips part, uncertain. A flicker of discomfort passes over her expression. Her breath becomes uneven. Her spine tightens. Her fingers tremble at the water's edge, then, without warning, her body slips sideways. She begins to slide into the water, her frame limp, her limbs floating strangely. Her eyes are wide, unfocused, fixed on something far beyond the vaulted ceiling. At first, the maids do not understand. They have seen noble women faint before. They assume this is the same. Just another spell of dizziness. Just another moment of passing weakness that can be resolved with salts or cool cloths. But then her body jerks violently. Her legs kick beneath the water's surface, sending a splash against the marble. A foot strikes the edge of the tub. One girl shrieks in panic. The handmaids rush forward, trying to pull her out, but her skin is slippery with rose oil, her limbs unwieldy and loose. She sinks again, choking, her face half submerged. She is not fainting. She is dying. Her skin, once porcelain pale, has flushed an angry red, blistering in patches. Her breath is ragged, shallow, collapsing into silence. When help is finally summoned, it comes with noise and urgency, but too slowly to make a difference. They lift her from the bath, steam rising from her like fog from a ruined battlefield. Her hair, once elegantly coiled, clings wetly to her cheeks. Her mouth is slightly open, her chest unmoving. The physician arrives and barely begins his examination before he recoils. A hush descends upon the room. No one dares speak first. In the official account, the cause of death is recorded as accidental scalding. The term is clinical, cold, a phrase that fails to capture the eerie weight of what truly happened. Among the servants, though, a different expression takes root. Passed from mouth to trembling mouth. Burned from within. Centuries later, scholars and skeptics alike still argue over the truth. Could the water truly have been hot enough to kill a healthy adult woman? Or was there something more at play? Some point to the possibility of a stroke or cardiac failure, triggered by the intense heat. Others suggest a darker motive. Poison slipped into her wine by an ambitious rival. A family feud settled in secret. And still others, especially those far removed from the scene, whisper about punishment. Divine retribution. A price paid for vanity or pride, but none of them can overlook the terrible symmetry. Here was a woman who devoted herself obsessively to beauty, to ritual, to the illusion of permanence. She spent hours on her appearance, doused in oils, steeped in perfumes. She bathed more often than most nobles dared. And yet, in the end, it was this very act. This intimate, indulgent routine. That betrayed her. She had insisted on being alone. No men allowed beyond the chamber doors. Privacy was her rule, and discipline her armor. Her reputation was built upon control. But in her final moments, she was stripped of all of it. Vulnerable. Silent. Her body sinking beneath perfumed steam, unnoticed until it was far too late. There was no public outcry. No marble monument carved in her honor. Only a hurried burial, and a section of the estate closed off, sealed behind heavy stone. Over the years that followed, the servants whispered of strange sounds echoing from the abandoned wing. The soft splash of water. The faint sob of a woman alone. One chambermaid swore she heard weeping through the walls. Another refused to go near the hallway entirely, muttering with averted eyes that hot water never forgets. And so the tale twisted into legend. A warning murmured to daughters of noble blood. Do not bathe alone. Do not bolt the door. Never trust the silence of the water when it lies too still. Even now, you find yourself wondering. Was it fear that killed her? Was it pride, arrogance, the old belief that she could outlast time? Or was it simply the body's ancient betrayal? The slow undoing that none of us can escape. Outside, thunder murmurs against stained glass windows, softened by time. You can almost hear it, even through centuries of silence. And as you close your eyes, you see the bath once more, still and gleaming, appearing harmless in its luxury. You realize how many deaths of the powerful take place not amid sword fights or courtly intrigue, but quietly. In secret. Within rituals that were once a source of comfort. Behind velvet curtains. Beneath rose-scented steam, you shift beneath your blankets. The room is calm, the air gentle, the temperature well within safety. And still, a part of you lingers on her final sight. Was it the flutter of candlelight? The warped reflection of her face on the surface? Or the slow rise of her own hand, reaching out? Not in vanity or command. But in one last plea for help, the bath begins to cool. The ghosts, for now, recede. The chamber falls away, and the steam, at last, begins to lift. The steam lifts and curls into the air, vanishing into the dim light until it thickens into fog. That fog gathers and transforms into golden lamplight, soft and flickering as it dances across ornate ceilings trimmed in gold leaf and heavy canopies draped in velvet. The walls around you shift and shimmer, and before you realize it, you're no longer in Hungary. The world has rearranged itself. You are standing in the heart of Imperial Russia, where vast marble corridors echo with the rhythmic click of polished heels, the rustle of silk skirts, and the hum of rumor passed from one powdered courtier to another. This is the Winter Palace. The year is somewhere in the late 18th century. And inside these walls, someone is very busy changing the narrative of a nation. Her name is Catherine. Catherine the Great. Few sovereigns in the long, glittering, and often blood-stained history of royalty have cast a shadow quite so immense, quite so audacious, or quite so saturated in intrigue as hers. Catherine ruled for more than 3 decades, modernized and expanded an empire, quelled insurrections with calculated force, and consumed volumes of Enlightenment philosophy under the low glow of candlelight. She reorganized the aristocracy, redefined governance, and remade Russia in the shape of her own extraordinary ambition. But despite the monumental breadth of her achievements, ask a stranger on the street what they remember most about Catherine the Great. And chances are, they won't mention her bold reforms or her skillful diplomacy, they'll mention the horse. Let's confront this directly. The infamous tale, the grotesque story that claims Catherine met her end while engaging in an obscene act with a stallion, is not just wrong. It is utterly, laughably, biologically impossible. A fabrication so crude it barely deserves breath. It is an absurd distortion born not from any evidence, but from a cocktail of misogyny, xenophobia, and the all-too-human compulsion to reduce powerful women into lewd jokes. Especially women who dared to rule on their own terms, yet what makes this even more remarkable is what actually did happen. Because the real story of Catherine's death, though lacking equestrian involvement, is not any easier to swallow. In fact, it's painfully human, unexpectedly quiet, and deeply uncomfortable. Let us go back. The morning of November 5, 1796, dawns cold and brittle at one of Catherine's less frequented palaces, situated just outside the imperial city of St. Petersburg. The Empress awakens feeling off balance. Something is not right. She's dizzy. There's a nauseous twist in her stomach. Her ladies-in-waiting, noticing the pallor on her face and the tremor in her hands, exchange worried glances. One suggests fetching a doctor. Another offers to bring stronger tea. Catherine, characteristically brusque and task-focused, waves them away. There is no time for weakness. There is work to be done, always. She retreats into her private study and quietly shuts the door behind her, and then, she disappears from view. Time drips past like melting wax. A servant comes by later that morning and knocks gently, offering a reminder of some small appointment. No answer. He knocks again, louder this time. Still nothing. Unease ripples through the household. Eventually, the door creaks open, and the scene they find inside will be relived for decades in anxious whispers. Catherine is lying on the floor, collapsed beside a chaise longue. She is fully dressed, her powdered wig tilted askew, her hand clenched around the corner of a letter she had apparently been reading. Her body is still. Her face pale, but she is not yet gone. Her breath comes shallow and uneven. Her pulse skips like a broken metronome. Alarmed attendants rush to carry her to her bed. Blankets are heaped over her. Doctors, summoned in haste, arrive with a flurry of outdated remedies and unhelpful urgency. One insists that draining her blood might reduce cranial pressure. Another applies mustard plasters to the soles of her feet, hoping to draw the illness downward. A third begins to pray aloud while dabbing lavender water on her temples. Catherine does not respond to any of it. She never wakes again. By the following day, she is dead. The official diagnosis is a stroke. A massive cerebral hemorrhage, to be precise. By modern standards. This is not surprising. Catherine was 67 years old. She was burdened by years of relentless stress, had possibly endured undiagnosed hypertension, and had spent decades pushing her mind and body beyond their natural limits. The sudden collapse behind a closed door allowed the event to remain mysterious, even mythic. And that obscurity created fertile ground for the wild stories that followed. Legends, especially the cruel ones, always seemed to cling more tenaciously to queens. The revolting rumor about her death did not appear immediately. It emerged gradually, oozing like mildew from the cracks of posthumous ridicule. Political cartoons began to appear across Europe, especially in France and Britain. They ridiculed her sexuality, her autonomy, her birth as a foreigner ruling a Slavic empire, and most viciously, her decision to reign without the presence of a king. One scurrilous pamphlet suggested she had perished beneath a saddle of her own design. A vile image, but one that spread like wildfire. Scholars and historians continue to debate the precise origin of this lie. Some point to the French revolutionaries, who may have concocted the story as part of their broader campaign to undermine the institution of monarchy altogether. Others believe the myth was first circulated during the Polish-Russian conflict, a time when anti-Catherine propaganda depicted her as grotesque, unnatural, and morally corrupted. Still others suggest that the whisper campaign may have begun among Russian nobles themselves, eager to defame her legacy in order to elevate their own positions in the court that followed her death. Whatever the source, there is no disagreement about the bitter irony of it all. Here was Catherine the Great, perhaps the most powerful woman in Europe during her lifetime, a leader who orchestrated revolutions and redefined empires, and yet, she could not shape the story of her own final breath. She had spent her reign sculpting an image of enlightened sovereignty. She authored manifestos on good governance. She established new educational systems. She filled her court with thinkers and corresponded with intellectuals like Voltaire. She ruled with intelligence, vigor, and clarity of purpose. And even so, the legacy that endures in popular culture is not one of brilliance, but of base scandal. Not her vision, but a vulgar fiction. It is as though the world refused to accept that a woman could be so commanding, so self-possessed, without punishment. So it invented a punishment for her. One so lurid, so nonsensical, that it overwhelmed the truth and buried it under layers of snickering rumor. You close your eyes and try to picture her, not as some caricature, but as she truly was. A figure of formidable presence, seated at her desk beneath the flicker of candlelight, surrounded by scrolls and maps, drafting new decrees by hand. Her ink-stained fingers tapping the wood. Her mind burdened with the weight of an empire in transition. She was exhausted. She had seen more than most, endured more than many, and she was trying to hold a crumbling world together using only her conviction and the written word. And in the end, she was alone, no chamber orchestra. No court assembled in breathless ceremony. No grand pronouncement. Just the soft thud of a body falling, the silent rebellion of the brain, and the quiet exit of a woman who had once cradled the fate of a continent in her grasp. Her funeral, by contrast, was a spectacle befitting an empress. Massive mourning processions wound through the streets. Delegations from foreign courts arrived in carriages draped in black velvet. Her body was embalmed with care, her crown placed gently upon her head, her remains displayed with solemn reverence. Russia grieved. Europe watched. And still, somewhere in the candlelit corners of salons and behind the closed doors of diplomatic residences, the tasteless joke endured. A falsehood passed from mouth to mouth, persistent and corrosive, and that, perhaps, is the deepest insult, not the moment of her death, but what came after. The distortion. The theft of dignity. The ease with which centuries of work can be undone by a single, well-placed lie. The air in the room grows still. The palace dissolves into silence. The gossip fades into the background. And you, now resting beneath your own warm blankets, feel the shadow of that silence settle in beside you. There is something quietly reassuring in remembering that even myths, no matter how stubborn, can fade away. That beneath the scandal and slander, the true Catherine remains. Unshaken. Undiminished. And finally, free from interruption. The cool, polished marble floors of Russia dissolve beneath your feet, and suddenly you find yourself transported to a place entirely different, somewhere hot, thick with spice and humidity. The night air hangs heavy around you, fragrant with the deep, earthy scents of sandalwood and clove, while somewhere in the distance, the sharp, haunting cry of a peacock cuts through the stillness. You have arrived in Agra, India. It is a time suspended between the fading breaths of the 1500s and the golden bloom of the 1600s. The Mughal Empire is at its zenith, a dazzling era of opulence and power, and at the very heart of the empire, the imperial kitchens are alive and quite literally steaming with activity. This is not a gathering to discuss war strategies or political intrigue. Instead, it is something far more indulgent and serious in its own way, a royal dessert competition, the likes of which have never been seen before. The emperor himself, whether Jahangir or Shah Jahan, historians have long debated which one presided over this particular night, has declared an evening of pure indulgence. You can almost imagine the ornate, handwritten scroll that would have been sent racing through the palace earlier that very morning, its flowing script commanding all royal chefs to prepare their finest creations. Only desserts. No limits, no restrictions, so beneath towering domes trimmed with gleaming gold. Surrounded by gardens thick with blooming night jasmine and the gentle hum of hidden fountains, the entire culinary elite of the Mughal court has gathered. Trays upon trays of elaborately spiced and exquisitely crafted dishes lie waiting beneath pristine white silk veils, a treasure trove of sweetness. This is not simply food, it is architecture. Spirals of pistachio paste twist like tiny sculptures. Towers of sugar rise, glistening in the candlelight. Golden domes sculpted from delicate saffron jelly shimmer with an almost otherworldly glow. Even the spoons are works of art, carved from fragrant sandalwood and inlaid with vivid lapis lazuli. At the very center of this sumptuous scene reclines the prince himself. For the sake of the story, let's call him Khurram, the future emperor, the famed patron of the Taj Mahal, and tonight, without question, the hungriest man in the entire subcontinent. He lounges on a velvet cushion, richly embroidered with scenes depicting the playful god Krishna stealing butter, perhaps an unintended divine foreshadowing of the sweetness he is about to consume. Around him, courtiers whisper in hushed tones, musicians pluck the strings of their sitars and tablas, and perfumed fans wave gently, stirring the heavy air with every one of his contented sighs. You can feel the anticipation building, the royal crescendo of indulgence swelling with every passing moment, and then comes the first course, kheer. This creamy rice pudding is soft and light as clouds, delicately scented with rosewater and cardamom. The first bowl disappears almost immediately. So does the second. Then the third bowl, this one flecked with shimmering edible silver leaf. The prince compliments the chef, smiling widely. Laughter bubbles up from the courtiers. Toasts are raised to the health of the empire and the talents of the royal kitchen, but Khurram does not stop there. He eagerly moves on to Shahi Tukta, slices of fried bread soaked in fragrant saffron syrup and topped with thickened, sweetened milk. Then comes halwa, presented in 3 different textures, each more sumptuous than the last. After that, chilled kulfi, shaved and served in halved mango shells that glisten in the candlelight. Then ladoos, syrup-glossed and dense, bursting with flavor. It is a parade of decadence, an unending feast of sweetness and spice. The prince, high on sugar and the spectacle of the evening, demands more. Each chef beams with pride as their creations vanish into his eager mouth. The courtiers cheer and the musicians play with growing speed and excitement. One dancer, radiant in silks, tosses flower petals into the air with every graceful movement, as if blessing the feast with divine favor. The entire hall is transformed into a temple of taste, the air thickening with the heavy scent of rose, saffron, and sugar. Each moment grows heavier, sweeter, more overwhelming, but as the night progresses, you begin to notice a change. By the time the 11th dish arrives, the prince's broad shoulders begin to slump just slightly. By the 12th dish, the vibrant energy fades, he wipes sweat from his brow with less of the usual flourish. When the 13th bowl is brought forth, some sort of creamy pistachio mousse, the prince pauses. His hand instinctively clutches his stomach. He mutters something softly in Persian, his words too slurred to catch clearly. Despite this, he insists, bring the next dish. One final kheer is served. This time, it is made with rare Kashmiri milk, garnished delicately with dried rose petals and a few precious strands of saffron that are worth their weight in gold. The prince lifts the spoon to his lips. He eats. And then, quite suddenly, he does not, he freezes, the spoon slipping from his grasp. His hands begin to tremble uncontrollably. His chest rises sharply, but then does not fall again. The entire court falls into a stunned silence. He groans once, faintly. Then he leans forward slowly, as if surrendering, and topples gently into the massive dessert tray below, sending nuts, rose petals, and shards of sugar flying into the air like royal confetti. Gasps ripple through the great hall. The dancers freeze mid-spin. The courtiers rush forward, but hesitate. To touch the body of a royal without explicit permission is punishable by death. A physician is summoned with urgency, sprinting barefoot across the polished marble floors, but by the time the doctor arrives, the prince's face is flushed and his lips pale. If he has a pulse at all, it is faint and drowning beneath the weight of 15 royal desserts. The doctor sniffs at the remains of the dessert tray, muttering something about an imbalance of the humors, and orders cold cloths pressed to the prince's forehead. One courtier suggests honey to draw the soul back. Another begins reciting verses from the Quran, hoping to summon divine intervention. But everyone in the room knows the truth. Everyone understands what no one dares to say aloud: he is gone, dead. From pudding. Or perhaps from pride. Possibly both. The official records, of course, are polite and vague. They mention only a sudden collapse following a festival of sweetness. No names are given. No bowls mentioned. Just carefully chosen phrasing and a hurried funeral. But palace gossip cannot be contained. Servants whisper in corners about the prince who tried to taste heaven and choked on its scent. One particularly bold poet even wrote, he ruled with silver on his tongue, but rice and milk were what stung. The emperor's death became legend. An example and a warning wrapped in humor. For years afterward, royal chefs refused to serve more than 6 sweets at a time. On the prince's birthday, no kheer was ever allowed within the palace grounds. And even today, old cooks in the kitchens of Delhi will raise an eyebrow and murmur quietly, "Don't make a kurum of yourself." If someone reaches for a 4th helping, historians continue to debate what really caused the prince's death. Some blame a massive heart attack, triggered by excess sugar and indulgence. Others suspect food poisoning from a spoiled bowl left too long in the open air. One British scholar, poring over ancient Persian manuscripts, proposed a more poetic explanation: he died of abundance. A man so accustomed to having everything he desired that he never learned how or when to stop, and that, perhaps, is the most embarrassing part of all, not the custard itself. Not the way he fell, face first, into the rosewater cream. But the fact that no one, no whispering advisor, no trembling servant, no honest friend, ever dared to speak the simple, crucial truth, enough, you ease deeper into your blanket now. The rich smell of rose syrup begins to fade. The music of the royal court grows distant and soft, like a lullaby floating away on a warm summer breeze. You see the silver trays vanish, one by one. The candles are quietly extinguished. The last almond, the last stray petal, remains untouched, because even kings, for all their power and pride, must learn that some things are too rich, too heavy, for the body to carry, and sometimes, the sweetest death is also the silliest. The sweetness of sugar slowly fades away, the heavy velvet drapes that once framed the royal chamber disappear into the mist, and suddenly the air around you shifts. Now you find yourself in a much colder place, less fragrant, more austere, and noticeably drafty. There is a chill that creeps through the space, curling lazily around your ankles like a ghost who has nowhere better to be. You stand within the stone walls of a modest medieval keep. The torchlight flickers low, casting wavering shadows on cold flagstones. Boots drum softly in a steady rhythm on the floor as figures move through the dimly lit hall. Perhaps this place is somewhere in the Low Countries or maybe in Bohemia. The precise kingdom no longer matters as much as the reason you are here tonight. The guest of honor at this feast is a king renowned not for his conquests or his wisdom, but for his famously loud and infectious laugh. His name, like so many rulers of the distant past, has blurred and faded into the pages of worn parchment. Some accounts suggest he was a regional lord who, for a brief moment in time, proclaimed himself king. Others whisper he belonged to a minor branch of a royal family, a cousin to someone significant, someone who never quite made it into the main story. A footnote in history, yet a man fond of good wine and utterly lacking in self-awareness. What does survive across the ages? However, is the story itself. You have come to witness the one and only documented case of a monarch who died from laughter. It begins, as many such tales do, with a banquet. Imagine a long, rough-hewn wooden table piled high with trenchers and plates laden with roasted fowl. Jugs of ale are passed rapidly from hand to hand, their contents disappearing as quickly as they arrive. In the corner of the hall, musicians play cheerful tunes on lutes and fiddles. A fire crackles merrily in the stone hearth, sending flickering shadows dancing on the walls, lending every face a fleeting nobility that the harsh daylight would never grant. The occasion itself might have been a celebration, perhaps marking a victory in battle, the signing of a treaty, or even the simple relief of having survived another harsh winter. But truthfully, by this point in the evening, no one was sober enough to clearly remember. Seated at the center of it all is the king. His cheeks are flushed a deep red, his hair tousled as if he has been running his hands through it for hours, and he is already well beyond the point of coherent speech after having drained 2 full goblets of wine. His laughter rings out, loud and hearty, bouncing off the walls and filling the hall like the beating of war drums. He laughs at everything, at his cousin's awkward, slurred toast, at the minstrel who has forgotten the words to his song halfway through, at the kitchen boy who, in a moment of clumsy desperation, tries to catch a pie that slipped from his hands with his foot. The king's booming laughter is infectious, spreading to all those gathered around. Then, just as the laughter reaches its peak, the jester makes his entrance. Every royal court of the time had one. This jester is a wiry figure, springing forward with the chaotic energy of a wild fox. Bells jingle from his shoes, and mischief sparkles in his wide grin. According to the scattered and often unreliable sources, his name was Roland the Shrill, though it is unclear whether this was his true name or simply a nickname given for his piercing laugh or his tendency to yell his jokes. Roland begins his performance. He launches into a long and winding tale, involving a duck, a priest, and a very bewildered pig. On paper, it should not be funny at all. In fact, it is hardly humorous. Yet the king is already giggling before the tale even begins. By the time Roland describes the pig wearing a bishop's hat, the king is doubled over, clutching his sides and wheezing uncontrollably. When the jester proceeds to imitate the pig delivering a sermon in Latin, the king can no longer catch his breath from laughter. He slaps the wooden table with his hand. Then his knee. Then his chest, gasping between bursts of laughter, and suddenly, he freezes. The joyous laughter gives way to sudden choking. His face flushes from red to a deep, alarming purple. His eyes widen in a terrified expression. Then, without warning, he collapses backwards from his chair. Yet even in falling, the king's mouth is curled in a smile. Chaos erupts in the hall. Some guests believe it is all an elaborate joke, a final prank from their beloved monarch. Others scream and rush forward in panic. The jester, eyes wide with fear, stumbles backwards into the shadows. The queen faints, slipping down the stone wall in a heap. Someone begins to recite the Lord's Prayer, but forgets the words halfway through, their voice faltering. A doctor arrives within minutes. He presses his ear to the king's chest, his face darkening into a frown. After a brief examination, he declares the king dead, the cause, asphyxiation brought on by uncontrollable laughter. It is a phrase that no one had ever heard before, and to this day, remains extraordinarily rare. Historians continue to debate what truly happened that night. Was it a stroke? An aneurysm? An undiagnosed heart condition pushed beyond its limits by an overwhelming laughing fit? Some believe the king may have choked on a piece of venison during his chortling, and the story was later smoothed over into something more palatable for the royal chronicles. But the majority agree that, whatever the underlying cause, the king's final moments were indeed precipitated by laughter. And yet, the story's impact did not end there. The following morning, the unfortunate jester, Roland himself, was arrested. He was accused of regicide by way of jest. After a lengthy and passionate debate, the charges were eventually dropped. How could anyone be guilty of murder when the weapon was nothing but joy? Roland was freed but left the court soon after, vanishing into the obscurity of folk songs and questionable tavern tales. Some say he took holy orders and became a monk. Others whisper he joined a traveling puppet troupe under an assumed name. But most remember only the jingling bells, the story of the duck, and the image of the pig in the bishop's hat. The king's death quickly became a cautionary tale. Throughout Europe, jesters were suddenly burdened with new rules: no jokes after drinking wine, no impersonations of clergy, and absolutely no references to farm animals in any punchlines. For a time, some courts went so far as to ban laughter during meals altogether, which reportedly made feasts unbearably stiff and awkward. As for the king himself, he was laid to rest with full honors. He was buried in a grand cathedral beneath a statue that gave no hint of his unusual final moments. The inscription on his tomb simply read, "He ruled with joy." The words were true but also elegantly vague. In private, however, the king's guards whispered another motto: "Death comes for kings. Sometimes with a sword. Sometimes with a snort. Now, you feel the corners of your lips lift. Just barely. A soft, sleepy smile appears as you settle deeper under your blankets. Because there is something wonderfully absurd and strangely beautiful about a ruler being brought low not by conspiracy, betrayal, or violence, but by the sheer ridiculousness of a perfectly timed joke. In the grand tapestry of royal history, laughter rarely serves as the final sound, yet for one crimson-faced monarch in a smoke-filled hall, that was exactly how the story came to its close. His eyes wide, his mouth open in joy far too large for his lungs to contain, you shift slightly beneath the warm covers, the night outside still and silent, and somewhere, faint but unmistakable, you think you can still hear a pig reciting scripture. You leave behind the fading laughter and the distant echoes of goblets clinking in celebration. The music slowly diminishes, growing faint until it is nothing more than a whisper in the background. The cold stone hall begins to dissolve around you, melting away into a landscape of sun-baked soil and the warm scent of dry hay. The air grows thick with unfamiliar fragrances, and somewhere far off, the deep, sonorous trumpet of a massive tusked creature reverberates. Now, you find yourself once again in India, but this time, you are further south than before, near the ancient city of Mysore. The heat is dry and unyielding, pressing down like a heavy shawl. Around you, the air thrums with a lively cadence, the rhythmic swinging of colorful parasols, the beating of ceremonial drums, and the restless movements of elephants pacing patiently. Today is a festival day, vibrant and alive with tradition and celebration. Royal processions snake through the streets, their paths lined with thousands of subjects who have gathered to witness the spectacle. Every person is dressed in their finest attire, from gleaming silk saris to elaborately embroidered dhotis, the colors bright and dazzling under the midday sun. The air is thick with incense smoke, curling upward in gentle spirals. The aroma of saffron and other spices lingers on the breeze, mingling with the joyous shouts and chants of the crowd. Pride shines in the posture of every marcher. In every measured step taken along the parade route, through the bustling crowd, you catch a glimpse of him. He is difficult to see clearly, but there he is, Prince Anandaraja. He is a lesser royal from a powerful regional dynasty, known for his ambition and flair. The prince is seated atop a raised wooden observation platform, positioned near the imposing gates of the palace. His robes shimmer in the sunlight, heavy with intricate gold embroidery that glints with every movement. His mustache is waxed meticulously, shaped into sharp, precise twin needles that frame his upper lip. He has already been sitting patiently for hours, unmoving but alert. He does not mind the wait. This day belongs to him. The grand procession has been planned and prepared for months, every detail carefully arranged to impress both his subjects and rival nobles. The parade will feature dancers in vibrant costumes, Brahmin priests chanting solemn prayers, and mounted soldiers wearing gold-threaded tunics that shine brilliantly. Most importantly, the spectacle will be led by a parade of elephants, dozens of them. Their hides are painted with swirling spirals and star patterns, and they are adorned with jeweled harnesses that sparkle like treasure. On their backs sit tall towers of intricately carved teak wood, carried with dignity and grace. The prince, however, has a special request. He insisted that the largest elephant in the entire province lead the parade. This magnificent creature is called Chandi, a revered temple elephant, grand and beloved by the people. Children wave excitedly at her, and old women offer her sticky balls of sugar as tokens of affection. To many, she is a symbol of strength and sanctity. But to the prince, she is a symbol of power that he wants to claim for himself. He has decided that when Chandi approaches, he will rise from his platform and stand tall in her presence. This gesture is meant to show his people that he is fearless and strong. That he holds a divine connection to the animal world, embodying a royal authority that bows to no tusk or trunk. So, as the procession nears, with the sound of heavy feet pounding the packed earth and Chandi's large ears fanning in measured rhythm, the prince slowly rises from his seat. His advisors immediately exchange anxious glances, whispering urgent pleas for him to sit down. The heat of the afternoon sun is intensifying, and the elephant draws ever closer. The crowd's excitement shifts into a nervous tension, yet the prince waves their concerns aside with a dismissive gesture. With deliberate steps, he climbs down from the platform and steps right into the path of the procession. Gasps ripple through the crowd. His loyal bodyguard lunges forward, his voice sharp as he whispers warnings. But the prince remains focused, his arms spread wide and robes flaring dramatically as he bows deeply in front of the approaching elephant. Chandi is well trained, having walked this route many times before without incident. However, on this day, her handler, positioned some distance behind her, is new to the task. Nervous and inexperienced, he tugs at her lead chain incorrectly. The wrong signal causes confusion. Meanwhile, the blinding sun shines directly into the elephant's eyes, adding to her disorientation. For a brief, frozen moment, everything holds its breath in stillness. Then, with a loud, distressed trumpet, Chandi suddenly lurches forward. Her trunk swings powerfully through the air. The prince, caught unprepared mid-gesture, is struck hard and sent sprawling sideways. His body folds awkwardly, as if controlled by invisible strings. He lands with a groan, but there is no time to recover. One of Chandy's massive feet comes down upon him with crushing force. The crowd explodes into screams of horror. The rhythmic drumming stops abruptly. Birds take flight from the trees in startled flocks. What was once a joyful royal parade transforms into a tragic scene in a matter of 3 seconds. The prince's advisors rush to his side, faces pale and grim. It is immediately clear that there is no hope. The injuries are catastrophic, and his survival is impossible. In historical records, the event is referred to in careful, muted language as a fatal incident during ceremonial observance. But the oral traditions passed down in the region tell a much more vivid and unvarnished story. One storyteller from Tamil Nadu sums it up bluntly: he tried to bow to a goddess and was stepped on by one instead. The elephant, for her part, was never blamed. Villagers believed that the incident was a divine accident. Perhaps the prince had offended Ganesh, the remover of obstacles, or even the earth itself by making such a bold claim of power for a single man. Despite the tragedy, Chandy was honored and respected. Yet she was retired from public ceremonies and sent to a quiet temple nestled in the hills. There, she lived out her remaining years peacefully, fed with bananas and bathed in gentle silence. The prince was buried with full honors befitting his rank. His crushed ceremonial crown was melted down and transformed into an offering bowl. This bowl was said to have been used only once, during the next eclipse, before being buried beneath the roots of a fig tree that, according to legend, still stands to this day, and the lesson from that day. It is whispered among royal guards, shared with quiet amusement behind the delicate fans of noblewomen, and scribbled in the margins of festival planning manuals throughout the subcontinent: do not stand in front of an elephant, even if you are royalty. Especially if you are royalty. Now, you find yourself thinking about the weight of that single step, the elephant's step, not the prince's. How slow and certain it must have felt beneath the sun. How quickly pride and power are flattened by something so large, so indifferent, that it does not even realize it is in the way. There is a hush that follows moments like these. Not just a hush born of shame or embarrassment, but one that brings a sudden shift in perspective. All the gold, the elaborate fanfare, the orchestras, and the rich plum-colored banners can vanish in an instant with just one misstep. One stubborn moment of ego. Or one elephant who, in her own mind, was simply walking the parade route, outside. You hear the soft night air shift gently. Perhaps a tree's leaves rustle quietly. Perhaps it is the sound of your own breath, steady and calm, and somewhere, deep within your dreams, the sound of slow, steady footsteps echoes, reminding you that power is impressive only until it meets something bigger, heavier, or simply uninterested. The thunderous footsteps of the elephants gradually fade away into silence. The dust that had been kicked up by their massive feet begins to settle slowly, drifting down to rest on the ground like a soft, pale blanket. The vibrant garlands of marigolds that once hung fresh and bright now droop and wither, their colors fading in the dry air. And then, as if carried by some unseen current, you find yourself transported far from the festival and its chaos. You are now standing within the cold draft of a medieval stone hall. The walls here are gloomy and angular, built from heavy blocks of gray rock that absorb the chill and echo every sound with an ominous reverberation. The air is thick with the strained dignity of kings who have sat too stiffly in too many long and tedious meetings, for far longer than they wished. But your attention does not rest on the massive tapestries hung along the walls, nor on the towering banners embroidered with lions and griffins that sway gently in the draught. Instead, your eyes are irresistibly drawn to the throne. Not just any throne. The literal throne itself. An oversized and imposing chair, studded with jewels, its polished oak frame glinting faintly in the dim light. The iron reinforcements gleam coldly. It is a magnificent piece, designed to be a symbol of supreme power and authority. Yet it also hides a secret, one that will soon reveal itself to be far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. This throne once belonged to a king. Though which king exactly is unclear. Some say it was King Wenceslas III of Bohemia. Others argue it was King Charles of Navarre. Still others insist it belonged to the Duke of Burgundy. Historical records disagree, tangled and confused over the centuries. But the story surrounding this throne remains firmly fixed in the annals of tragic history, and it endures because of what is about to happen here tonight. On this very night, a monarch will meet his end. Not by sword, not by poison, but by the chair he trusted to uphold him. Picture this king seated amidst a dusty council meeting. He wears robes that are far too heavy for the season, layered and ornate, causing him to sweat beneath their weight. His crown, crafted from gold and precious stones, sits awkwardly atop his thinning hair, too large and unwieldy. His expression is one of boredom and impatience. The chamber around him is stuffy and warm, filled with the murmurs and shuffles of courtiers and advisers. The conversation has once again turned to matters that hold no interest for him: taxes, the repair of bridges, disputes over grain tariffs. These issues wear on him, dragging time into a slow and tedious crawl. What captures his attention more than anything else is the newly refurbished throne that has been delivered just that week. It is meant to be a statement piece, a symbol of his royal authority and the grandeur of his reign. The chair is hand-carved, every inch covered in intricate floral patterns etched in silver. Its high back towers behind him, and the seat is lined with rich velvet. The legs are reinforced with bronze, meant to give an impression of strength and permanence. The armrests are sharp-edged enough to cut through a roast. To all who see it, the throne appears magnificent, awe-inspiring, and fit for a king. Yet there is something no one notices. Perhaps someone in the court did notice it but chose to remain silent. A small but crucial detail lies hidden at the back of the throne. A bolt that has not been filed down properly. It protrudes just slightly, barely visible unless one looks closely. It is a hard, cold point of metal about the length of a finger, positioned exactly where a king's spine might rest when seated. And so, the king shifts in his seat. Perhaps he leans back after enduring a particularly long and tedious speech from a bishop. Perhaps he sighs heavily, trying to find a moment's relief. Perhaps he slides just an inch further back than he normally would, seeking a bit more comfort in his heavy robes. Then the moment comes. He gasps. The sound is sudden and sharp. A cold intake of breath that freezes the room in place. His body jerks forward, as if pulled by some unseen force. One hand shoots out to grip the side of the chair, desperate to steady himself. A dark stain blossoms on his tunic, spreading quickly and unmistakably. Blood, blooming like a sudden, dark flower, chaos breaks loose instantly. Advisors leap to their feet, some shouting commands, others staring in horror. The court physician, a solemn man who always carries a velvet pouch filled with dried herbs and leeches, rushes forward with trembling hands. But it is far too late. The bolt has pierced the king's lower spine. Some say it struck a vital artery. Others believe it caused a fatal seizure. No one disputes the fact that it happened swiftly, shockingly, and in full view of the entire noble court. The details remain a subject of heated debate among historians. Was this a freak accident? A tragic result of careless carpentry and oversight? Or was there something more sinister at play? A deliberately placed trap hidden beneath the guise of a design flaw. The bolt was placed with unnerving precision. In a spot that could not have been accidental. One popular theory claims the royal carpenter was bribed to sabotage the throne. Another suggests the throne was recycled from a previous court, a piece long considered cursed and sent away. Some of the more imaginative scribes of the era even called it divine punishment, a just retribution for an ill-timed tax imposed on monasteries. Despite the rumors and theories, most agree on one thing. This was a tragic case of betrayal by furniture. In the days that followed, the throne was removed from the hall, subjected to careful examination, and ultimately consigned to flames. Some voices called for it to be buried deep beneath the earth. The bishop vehemently opposed this, declaring it was already too close to hell. Others wished to preserve it as a cautionary relic, but the king's widow ordered its complete dismantling the very next morning. No more thrones with secrets, she decreed. At least none that were visible. The new king who succeeded ruled with caution and a little more humility. For the rest of his reign, he preferred to sit on a humble wooden stool rather than trust another throne, yet the story never truly faded from memory. Across castles and courts throughout Europe, an unusual tradition took root. Before any new monarch was permitted to sit upon the throne, a servant would perform a ritual test. In some places, this meant throwing a heavy cushion onto the seat to test its safety. In others, a dog would be sent up to jump onto the chair first. These customs may seem superstitious, but they were born from the sharp and painful memory of an undignified and deadly death, and now, tucked into the softness and safety of your own bed, you feel your spine sink deeper into your mattress. You think of that bolt. Silent, still, and waiting patiently. You realize how a single inch, a fraction of movement in the wrong direction, unraveled a kingdom's power in an instant. It is strange, is it not, how a man can survive wars, plots, conspiracies, and curses, only to be undone by a poorly installed chair. But this, you begin to see, is the pattern woven through these royal deaths. Not the grand drama, but the minute detail. Not the poison or dagger, but the overlooked moment. Not betrayal by an enemy, but betrayal by circumstance. Even thrones, it seems, can stab you in the back. The twilight hush of Europe settles once again, wrapping the scene in its gentle, fading light. This time, the sound accompanying the dusk is the lazy slap of river water against the uneven stones lining the banks. The air carries the mixed scent of wet grass and the faint but unmistakable aroma of cheap beer, spilled in small quantities on wooden tables and forgotten in the warm evening. You find yourself somewhere in the borderlands, perhaps southern Austria or maybe a tiny fragment of the old Holy Roman Empire. The exact geography is blurry, hazy, and not terribly important. What lingers clearly in your mind is the river itself. A wide, languid ribbon of water that curves gracefully through patches of farmland, quaint villages, and the occasional cluster of weathered cottages. And on the banks of this slow-moving river, something absurd, almost farcical, is about to unfold. Tonight, your companion is a man known as Duke Leopold. Or perhaps it could have been Count Friedrich or Lord Otto. In truth, the name hardly matters because these nobles are often interchangeable in their blundering egos and ill-advised antics. This particular noble's lineage is murky, his fashion choices deeply regrettable, and his judgment about to reveal itself as fatally flawed. The occasion is the annual summer festival of Saint Florian. It is a celebration rooted in harvest rituals, reverence for local saints, and, curiously, an inexplicable homage to swans. No one alive seems quite certain why swans play such a starring role in this festivity, but their elegant forms and silent grace have become tradition. However bizarre, the court has gathered along the riverbank, setting up tents that flap softly in the evening breeze. Pages dart back and forth, carrying silver platters laden with roasted meats and fresh fruits. Musicians tune their lutes and fiddles, preparing for the night's revelry. Clumsy dogs chase after roasted pigeons with uncoordinated enthusiasm, while children weave flower crowns from stray weeds, their laughter mingling with the murmurs of the crowd. Under a linen canopy, the Duke sits on a carved wooden stool, dressed in a tunic the exact shade of spoiled mustard, a color that does no favors to his complexion. He sips greedily from a goblet so large it might have been intended for soup rather than wine. He has already polished off 4 such goblets. Beside him, a priest intones an overly long and solemn blessing for the swans, those regal white birds meant to symbolize purity, grace, and the endurance of royal bloodlines. The crowd claps with practiced politeness. But the swans themselves remain unimpressed, gliding past with a noble indifference as if royalty is tired of its own ceremonies. Then, in this mix of solemnity and revelry, someone speaks up. Nobody knows exactly who it was. It might have been a courtier with a streak of malice or a prankster testing the Duke's temper. "Your Grace," the voice murmurs, low and cautious, "surely a man of your stature could command even a swan to bow." A hush falls over the crowd. A breath is held. A bubbling chuckle escapes somewhere near the back, and then the worst sentence ever uttered at any river festival echoes through the air: "Bring me a boat." Historians have argued for centuries about what Duke Leopold truly intended with that demand. Was he hoping to fetch a single swan feather for his hat? Did he plan an impromptu swan dance, as he later called it in a letter that survives only in fragments? Or, more likely, was it simply the wine and the festivities speaking louder than any sense or prudence? Regardless of his intentions, within minutes, a boat is procured. It is more of a fishing skiff than a proper vessel, narrow, unstable, and poorly balanced. One oar is broken, and the other had been repurposed by a gardener into a walking stick just days before. Yet, despite all these shortcomings, the boat floats. Mostly, Leopold climbs aboard, wobbling like a child learning to walk. He waves theatrically to the assembled crowd, still clutching his enormous goblet. He brings with him a net, a small stool, and even a trumpet. No one attempts to stop him. Perhaps they think this is some kind of theatrical farce, or maybe they simply know better than to challenge a drunken noble with inherited power and a desperate urge to impress a flock of waterfowl. The boat rocks precariously as he settles in. The Duke bellows loudly, trying to sound regal and commanding. He plays a few discordant notes on the trumpet, announcing, as he claims, his approach to the Swan Court. The swans, for their part, continue paddling downstream, unbothered and majestically bored, and now the real pursuit begins. He rows badly, wildly, and with little coordination. One oar dips too deep into the water, the other barely skims the surface. The skiff spins in tight circles, bumping against reeds and scraping across algae-covered stones hidden just below the waterline. His hat blows off into the river with a splash. He attempts to stand, shouting, "Surrender, ye feathered knights!" while swinging his net forward like a lance in some comical battle. Then the inevitable occurs. The boat suddenly lurches violently as it strikes a submerged log hidden beneath the murky water. The oars slip from his grasp. For a moment, he is laughing, triumphant, drenched in moonlight and hubris. Then, with no warning, he plunges beneath the surface. He is fully submerged. His velvet and brocade garments drag him down like the loving arms of a drowning embrace. His oversized wine goblet floats beside him for a heartbeat, tipping over and spilling the last drops, as if offering one final toast to a man who aimed too high. There is a long pause on shore. The crowd, thinking it part of the act, applauds politely. Someone even tosses a flower into the river, a gesture meant for celebration. Then the silence stretches out, growing heavier. Panic erupts suddenly. 2 guards dive into the water in a desperate attempt to rescue the Duke. One loses his boot in the chaos. Another forgets how to swim halfway across the river. Finally, a local fisherman with a jagged scar across his chin rows out steadily and pulls the Duke from the reeds. But it is too late. The man is limp, pale, and wrapped in his own cloak like a soggy, abandoned burrito. The official report is, predictably, generous, a tragic drowning during festival observance. The version told in local songs is less kind. Leopold went chasing swans, forgot the depth, forgot his brawn. Now the fish wear royal lace, and ducks still giggle at his face. Historians continue to debate whether he was drunk enough to forget that velvet does not float or that swans are wild animals not known for diplomatic flexibility. One 19th-century scholar has insisted it was suicide cloaked in farce, while a postmodern theorist once argued it was performance art, centuries ahead of its time. But the truth is simpler, sadder, and even more absurd. He drowned because no one ever told him no. Because years of nodding courtiers and giggling advisors had taught him that every foolish idea he had was pure gold, even the ones that involved boats, birds, and too much wine, the swans, for their part, drifted away with not so much as a backward glance. You breathe in deeply now, slow and steady, the gentle sound of the river water lapping at muddy banks settles in your ears. You picture the lanterns still glowing softly along the shore, the music finally silenced, and the spilled wine staining empty chairs under the stars. There is something strange and deeply human in this ending. Something soft beneath all the absurdity. A man who tried to capture beauty, clumsily and foolishly, and who fell into it instead. Not through malice or evil, but simply because he wanted, too much, to be seen. The river returns to calm. The skiff drifts silently, empty, the swans regroup and glide onward, and you drift too, slipping out of laughter, out of judgment, out of the story itself, and into the water-smooth lull between dreams. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, fading glow over the riverbanks behind you. Now the scene shifts, and you find yourself surrounded by the flicker of firelight once again. But this is not the wild, untamed blaze of a campfire. Instead, it is the carefully controlled, golden glow of a grand ceremonial hearth. You are no longer outside but inside a vast feasting hall. The walls rise high around you, adorned with stained glass windows that catch the dying light and scatter it in kaleidoscopic patterns onto the worn stone floor. Long wooden tables stretch from one end of the hall to the other, their surfaces scarred from years of use. Iron platters hold glistening boar roasts. The rich aroma of roasted meat mingling with the heavy scent of burning wood and spilled ale. Nearby, musicians fiddle clumsily with their lutes, their fingers unsure but their enthusiasm unwavering. A bard, perched awkwardly on a low bench, finishes reciting a poem that no one had asked for and even fewer are paying attention to. At the head of this long hall, sitting upon a chair raised just a half step above all others, is the man of the hour. He wears a crown that catches the firelight, a heavy cloak draped over broad shoulders, and an expression of unmistakable pride. Whether you call him King Edric or Lord Howrick matters little now. What matters is that this is a man fully convinced that history owes him nothing less than a highlight reel. A spectacle to be remembered. Tonight is winter's crest, the high feast that falls at mid-year. A day marked by the kingdom as holy, a sanctioned excuse for merriment, for overindulgence in ale, and for generous helpings of goose fat dripping down the chins of every noble who can afford it. And this king, broad-shouldered and a little too loud, a little too old to be quite so boisterous, revels in every moment of it. The air is thick, heavy with the smell of roasting meat, the smoky tang of burning timber, and an unmistakable haze of overconfidence. At the climax of the evening celebrations, the royal steward steps into the hall carrying a dish of great importance, the ceremonial blessing loaf. It is a dense, round bread, baked once a year with painstaking care. Its crust is golden brown and shiny, brushed with a final glaze of honey and butter that makes it gleam under the torchlight. This loaf is stuffed with dried figs, cloves, and the kind of legend that only grows with each telling. Hidden deep inside the bread is a tiny charm, fashioned in the shape of a crown. Tradition dictates that whoever finds this charm in their piece of bread is blessed with luck, insight, and divine favor for the coming year. It is meant to be a game, a light-hearted ritual filled with symbolism and fun. Usually, the loaf is passed from hand to hand. Each person takes a polite bite or two. When the charm is discovered, there is a cheerful shout and laughter. It is a moment of delight and shared good fortune, but tonight is different. Tonight, King Edric decides that he deserves to be the first. With a commanding wave of his hand, he dismisses the steward's serving knife. "I shall take the lucky bite myself," he declares loudly, raising his goblet in triumph. The crowd around the table chuckles softly. They know he loves the attention, without hesitation. The king tears into the bread with the assuredness of a man who has never once had to peel an orange for himself. One bite follows another, careless and eager. A large chunk breaks off unevenly, then something unexpected happens. there is a faint but unmistakable sound, a soft, metallic clink against his teeth. The king pauses, a slow smile creeping across his face. He coughs lightly, then takes another bite. But then everything changes, his body stiffens, his eyes dart with alarm. He raises a hand to his throat and coughs again, this time harsh and wet. Blood begins to seep from the corner of his mouth, bright and shocking against the dark hairs of his beard. Suddenly, the king shudders violently forward, and collapses. His face lands against the very loaf he had just bitten. The hall falls into stunned silence. A woman screams sharply. The bard drops his lute in surprise. One knight blurts out, "Did he just die on the bread?" The royal steward rushes forward, lifting the king's shoulders, but his mouth hangs open, his throat spasms uncontrollably. Blood now drips freely from his nose. Something rigid protrudes from his mouth. It is the crown-shaped charm. Too sharp, too solid. It has punctured his soft palate and lodged deep inside, like a hidden dagger embedded within dough. They scramble to help him. Hands pat his back urgently. Someone tries to tilt his head. Another man reaches into his mouth, but the blood makes it impossible to hold a grip. Within minutes, it is clear, the king is gone, dead. Stricken by a loaf of bread. In front of 24 lords, 5 jesters, and at least 6 half-eaten pies, the hall erupts into chaos. Voices shout accusations. Was this an assassination? A poison charm? Sabotage? The baker is dragged from the kitchens, slapped harshly with a ladle before he can utter a single word. The bishop rants about dark omens and divine wrath. The steward sobs into the tablecloth. The jester, confused and helpless, blows his pig-shaped horn once and then slinks away into a small cupboard to hide. Meanwhile, the king's body remains slumped forward over the feast table. One pale hand still rests on the loaf. The crown charm, bent and stained with blood, slips from his mouth with a faint clink as it hits the platter below. For centuries, historians have puzzled over this strange death. One theory suggests that the charm used that year was an antique, an heirloom piece forged from iron and sharper than intended. Another claims the king simply bit down too hard, too eagerly, stuffing more bread into his mouth than he could safely handle. One old court record even notes that Edric was boasting of his strong king's teeth mere seconds before disaster struck. Of course, there are darker rumors. Some whisper that it was murder, carefully planned and executed through the most absurd means imaginable. That the charm had been tampered with. That a rival faction seized a moment to bake revenge into the loaf. But no proof was ever uncovered. No trial convened. Only an awkward, heavy silence that lingered through the remainder of the feast. The bread was burned the following day, the baker vanished without a trace. The royal court quietly retired the title of bread steward forevermore. Future blessing loaves were made flatter, lighter, free of charms, and served only under strict supervision, yet the memory remained. Across village squares in the countryside, children would sing playful rhymes about the king who bit too deep. In a small tavern, a wooden statue was carved, capturing a man with puffed cheeks and wide eyes, forever caught mid-chew. In some regions, a superstition grew: always cut your bread before eating and never swallow anything that bites back. The cathedral bell where the king was buried is said to toll twice every year, once to mark the feast and once to remember the bite. Locals claim that when the bell rings, the bread in your cupboard grows hard, as if the memory itself lingers, and you lie now, warm beneath your blankets, your body still. You picture the flickering shadows of that feast hall, now cold and empty. Candles burned low to stubs. Tables only half cleared. A single piece of spiced bread left untouched on a platter. You hear a silence that echoes through flour and memory, and you smile softly, because even kings, wrapped in all their glory and power, sometimes forget that symbolism is best savored slowly and chewed with care. The feast gradually fades from memory as the flickering candles on the tables sputter and burn low, their gentle light dwindling into shadows that creep along the walls. Now, the night draws you further northward, into a land shrouded by thick mists and heavy, low-hanging grey clouds, the rugged, wild expanse of Scotland. The exact year is lost to time, resting somewhere in the uncertain haze of the 13th or 14th century. Nobody can say for certain, and perhaps wisely, nobody dares to ask the locals too many probing questions about such matters. The moors spread endlessly, a vast sea of tangled heather and rough grass, whispering softly beneath the mournful wail of a persistent wind. It presses against the cold stone of a towering fortress perched defiantly on a rugged bluff above the relentless sea below. This is the stronghold of Lord Ewan MacAngus, a nobleman whose name would endure through the ages not for deeds of great valor, nor for acts of mercy, but rather for one unforgettable and somewhat embarrassing reason: he tried to show off a view. The setting itself was undeniably grand. A storm had passed just hours earlier, and now the heavy clouds had broken apart, allowing slender fingers of sunlight to pierce through and illuminate the cliffs with a dramatic glow. Seabirds wheeled and circled overhead, their cries carried on the salty air, while below, the waves crashed and thundered against the rocks with a ceaseless roar. Ewan MacAngus, recently returned from a small but hard-fought campaign against a neighboring clan, was in high spirits. His mood was buoyed by a few too many cups of sweet, honeyed mead, and with his usual mixture of pride and bravado, he had invited his court to join him in admiring what only a Highland heart can claim as home. In simpler terms, he was bragging. He led his guests through the ancient stone corridors of the castle, their footsteps echoing in the great hall where banners hung heavy and faded. They climbed the winding spiral stairs of the tower, past two guards whose faces grew increasingly tense and uneasy, and finally spilled out onto the highest parapet of the castle's western turret. The wind struck them immediately, sharp and biting, full of the salt and dampness carried up from the sea below. It tugged mercilessly at their cloaks, rattled the sheaths and scabbards of their swords, and whistled and moaned through every crack and crevice in the weathered stonework. The view, in all fairness, was magnificent. The sea stretched endlessly, a roiling expanse of green-gray waves topped with white foam. The coastline curved gracefully along the horizon, a ribbon of land bordered by restless water. Far off in the distance, a small fishing boat bobbed helplessly on the tide, tiny against the vastness of the ocean, but Ewan wanted more than just to see the view. He did not simply want to admire it from a safe distance. He wanted to possess it, to stake a claim on that wild edge of the world and stand there proudly, grinning back at the gods as if daring them to challenge his authority. So, with a boldness born of drink and hubris, he stepped forward, leaving the gathered group behind. He moved past the moss-covered battlement onto a section of the stonework that appeared solid but was, in truth, far less secure than it seemed. "Come look from here," he shouted, his voice carried on the wind as he lifted a goblet in one hand and gestured grandly with the other. "You'll not find a finer sight this side of heaven." And then the wind did what it has done since the dawn of time. It shifted, not with fury or force, but suddenly, just enough. His heavy cloak caught the gust like a sail, snapping outward. Ewan took a half-step backward to steady himself, but the moss beneath his boot betrayed him. It was slick and treacherous, and he slipped. Lord Ewan MacAngus, last of his name and wrapped in far too much tartan, tumbled down from the cliff, falling like a stone trapped inside a bottle. His fall ended in the most undignified of places. He landed squarely in a pig-pen. This particular detail is often omitted from the more polished historical accounts but lives on in the oral traditions of the local peasantry, who remember it with grim enthusiasm. At the base of the cliff, nestled against the castle's outer wall, was a small enclosure for Highland pigs. Coarse-haired, stout creatures with little concern for the troubles of noblemen. Ewan's body crashed into the center of the pen, collapsing the wooden fencing and scattering the sleepy animals in all directions. According to one nearby farmhand, the shock of the landing even startled a chicken into laying an egg prematurely. Ewan MacAngus did not survive the fall. His body was retrieved with a mixture of reverence and embarrassment. The priest who had come to administer last rites reportedly had to pause twice to compose himself and avoid laughter. The noble lord's armor had bent in ways it was never designed to bend, and his once proud cloak was found twisted tightly around one foot. His boots were never recovered. The official report declared that Lord Mackingus perished in a fall whilst surveying his ancestral lands. Yet the locals, with their sharper memories and less guarded tongues, remembered the truth quite differently, that it was the wind which pushed him, the pigs which cushioned him, and his own pride which doomed him. Historians have puzzled endlessly over the precise details of the accident. Was the parapet weakened or crumbling? Had the stones been slick with rain? Did the effects of the mead play a greater part than anyone would admit? Some have suggested that the wind was more than a mere breeze, that it was a symbol of fate reclaiming what arrogance had momentarily borrowed. One wandering bard captured the essence of the tragedy in a song, surviving only in fragments. He rose to claim the clouds and foam, and pigs received him kindly home. In the years following the incident, a railing was installed along the parapet, a modest and practical iron barrier, though a source of quiet shame for the clan. The next lord decreed that all drinking within the tower be forbidden, and for decades it became customary for guests of the Mackingus family to toast only from the safety of the courtyard, preferably while seated. Yet the cliff where Ewan fell retains a notorious reputation. The locals still call it Fool's Point, and as for the pigs, long gone from their pen, vanished into memory and time, their legacy remains. On certain stormy nights when the wind howls fiercely up the rocky slopes and the sea boils with whitecaps below, shepherds swear they can hear not just the cries of gulls but a faint, wordless roar, the ghostly sound of a man who dared the edge and lost. You let out a deep, quiet sigh now. There is something oddly peaceful about this story, is there not? A man, caught in his own moment of pride and awe, lifted up by the grandeur of the world around him, only to be pulled mercilessly down by gravity and just enough moss, and you lie there beneath your blankets, warm and still. Your bones rest easy, your breath slows to a soft rhythm. The cliff fades away. The storm moves on. And somewhere, in the back of your mind, you sense it, that final moment of lift, that thin, treacherous space between pride and fall, and a pig, looking up. The cliffs have gradually retreated from view, the persistent wind finally quieting down, and now you find yourself beneath a moonless sky, somewhere deep within the wild, untamed interior of China. The landscape here is ancient and mysterious. Mountains roll and stretch like the spines of enormous, sleeping dragons resting beneath a heavy veil of mist. The dense forests surrounding you sigh softly as the cool air moves through their leaves. It is a quiet, somber camp, illuminated only by a handful of scattered lanterns that glow faintly, like distant stars fallen to earth. The crisp scent of pine resin mingles with the rich, worn smell of saddle leather, and you catch the thin trail of smoke curling upward from a small fire that is slowly dying. Its embers dimming in the chill night air. This place is far removed from the grandeur of a palace or imperial court. Instead, it is a humble military outpost, simple and functional, meant only to serve the needs of men far from home. Near the fire sits a figure wrapped in heavy furs, partially buried beneath layers of scrolls, blankets, and what remains of his own tangled pride and dignity. This man is no ordinary traveler. He is Emperor Zhao Xian of the Song dynasty, or perhaps another fallen ruler lost to the pages of history, for the records are blurred and the details are uncertain. What remains clear, however, is that his story concludes in a way both tragic and strangely surreal. Tonight, your emperor is on the move. Once, he was a great man, at least in title and position. Now, years after being forced from his throne, he travels not as a sovereign but as a guest and prisoner of a Mongol warlord. He has been sent on a ceremonial inspection tour through these rugged mountains, a symbolic gesture to demonstrate control, submission, or perhaps mere mercy. The journey is long and cold. It is filled with awkward formalities, bland trail food that falls far short of imperial standards, and the endless weight of his diminished status. At last, the caravan halts for the night. Tents are pitched hastily under the dark sky. Fires flicker and flare in the distance, casting long shadows over the rough terrain. The emperor is assigned his own sleeping area, a raised cot draped in fine silks, and most importantly, a padded sleeping roll lined with wool, it seems stitched tightly with gold thread. The roll is heavy, richly made, designed more for show and ceremony than for practical comfort in the field. One might imagine that such a gift would offer some comfort to a weary man far from home. But this very sleeping roll becomes the instrument of his final moments. As the camp settles into restless sleep, Zhao fusses with his bedding. He insists on arranging it himself, turning away his servants who offer assistance. Perhaps it is pride that compels him to maintain some semblance of control. Perhaps it is the cold biting into his tired joints. Or perhaps, after years of being helped, he simply wishes to prove that he still commands himself. The sleeping roll, despite its lavish appearance, proves difficult to manage. The fabric refuses to unroll smoothly. The seams are taut and unforgiving. With effort, he climbs inside, awkwardly wedging his body into the tight cylinder of fabric that is meant to keep him warm and secure through the cold night. He lies back, expecting relief. Then, a terrible realization dawns: he cannot move. The roll has twisted around him, binding his arms tightly to his sides. The silk has bunched uncomfortably at his neck, pressing in where it should have offered softness. The cords designed to secure the edges have looped inadvertently around one wrist and tightened under his back. He struggles to shift his position but finds no space. Attempts to sit up are thwarted by the roll's constriction. His legs are elevated awkwardly, his breath shortens as the wool lining feels suddenly stifling. He is trapped. Panic begins to blossom inside him. He calls out softly at first, then once more, but the cold mountain air swallows his voice, carrying it far away. The fire outside crackles and pops quietly. Guards at the camp's edge laugh softly at some joke. No one notices the faint, muffled rustling inside the royal tent. The emperor kicks once, then twice, but exhaustion quickly overtakes him. The oxygen inside the roll becomes thin and scarce. The night presses in cold and relentless. His mouth opens, gasping, but the fabric pulls taut, refusing to yield. He tries to roll or wriggle free. But he is completely ensnared, and in this slow, suffocating quiet, somewhere between dignity and absurdity, the emperor breathes his last. Morning arrives with a muted light. When a servant finally pulls back the flap of the tent, they find the emperor still wrapped within the confines of the sleeping roll. At first glance, his form appears peaceful, as if he simply rests. But when they attempt to rouse him, the awful truth emerges like a cruel unraveling of silk threads. He has suffocated within his own bedding. Historians have long debated the meaning of this strange death. The Mongol general who had hosted the expedition is said to have remarked only, "He died like a scroll unopened." Some have interpreted this as a metaphor, others as a cynical mockery of fallen royalty. The official dispatch sent to the capital was careful and vague. The former emperor passed in the night from causes unknown, wrapped in stillness. But a monk from Sichuan wrote a more candid account. He was crushed not by armies or enemies, but by the very fabric meant to comfort him. Rumors swirled, whispers of assassination, suspicions of sabotage, suggestions that the sleeping roll might have been purposely designed to bind too tightly. None of these claims were ever proven. The roll itself was burned without ceremony. The tent was folded and packed away. The body was sent home under a veil of quiet shame and muted regret. In Chinese folklore, the tale took on the form of a cautionary parable. It became a warning against silken pride and the dangers of forgetting that even the softest things can turn into cages. One poem, still remembered in fragments, reads, "The robe that warms becomes the rope that binds, a whisper lost in thread and wind." You imagine the scene now. The moon still high above, the fire long since extinguished, the cold pressing relentlessly inward. A man who once wielded immense power and influence, trapped not by swords or enemies, but by his own unwillingness to call for help, and in this moment, you feel a strange sympathy, because, after all, we all do it. We wrap ourselves in things that seem safe, things that offer comfort until suddenly they do not. Pride, routine, silence, habits we mistake for strength. Sometimes, by the time we realize we are ensnared, it is already too late to loosen the ties, but you are not like that. You breathe now, slow and deep. Your blanket lies loose and warm across your body. You shift easily in your bed. Free and unbound, far away, beyond the frozen tent where a man died curled in quiet, unroyal panic, you rest in peace. The mountain air thins and fades behind you, leaving only the soft stillness of the valley in its place. The silence itself seems gentler now, less sharp against your skin and ears. Before you stands a tall iron gate, cold and imposing beneath a heavy, brooding sky filled with thick clouds that promise rain. The setting feels unmistakably Central European, perhaps somewhere deep in Transylvania, or maybe in the shadowed forests of Bavaria. Wherever exactly you find yourself, the atmosphere is damp and chilly, the world around you eerily symmetrical, as if every stone and shadow has been measured and placed with meticulous care. You have arrived at the castle of Prince János, a man both aristocrat and eccentric. An amateur inventor who is also the proud owner of the most elaborate personal torture museum anywhere in the region. This evening's royal death will not take place on a battlefield strewn with swords and shields, nor will it happen during a grand banquet filled with wine and whispered treachery. Instead, it will unfold within the chilling confines of the very collection of horrors that the prince himself carefully assembled for his own dark fascination. The year is 1681. The dawn of the Enlightenment is still gathering strength, but János remains a child of a darker era, born into the final lingering shadows of medieval cruelty. Yet despite his upbringing, he fancies himself a man of progress and refinement. He reads Latin, studies mechanical clocks, and has a peculiar fascination with devices of all kinds. You follow him as he leads you through the castle's east wing. The corridors twist and turn, winding like a labyrinth through ancient stone walls. Along the way, you pass iron shackles rusted with age, faded anatomical sketches pinned to the walls like grim trophies. Candlelight flickers, casting long dancing shadows that make the polished iron gleam with an almost unnatural glow. You walk past a small chamber filled with an array of chastity belts, each locked and sealed tight. Further on, glass cases display collections of preserved human fingers, yellowed and brittle with time. Finally, the prince halts before what he proudly calls his masterpiece, a life-sized Iron Maiden. The towering iron sarcophagus stands silent and ominous. It is hinged, humanoid in shape, and fitted inside with a series of wickedly precise spikes. Each spike was positioned with cruel care, designed not to kill instantly but to frighten and torment slowly, as the prince often boasted. Some guests say it was a replica. Others claim it was the original prototype, forged by a blacksmith who fled the country soon after its completion. The Iron Maiden is kept polished and gleaming. The prince oils the hinges and guards it with obsessive devotion. It stands like a dark statue in a chapel dedicated to fear. Tonight, János is showing off his prized creation to a small group of unfortunate visitors, minor nobles and scholars carefully chosen to admire his grim collection. The prince has indulged in a little too much wine, his movements a little too loose and his speech growing grander by the minute. He paces in front of his audience, delivering a lecture on the ingenuity of pain and the engineering of terror. His guests listen, some nodding politely, others smiling awkwardly, and one man clearly trying not to gag. Then, with a dramatic flair, the prince steps inside the Iron Maiden. This is meant to be a demonstration. He does it often. The inner spikes have been trimmed near the center, allowing him to lean safely between them without injury. "See," he says with a boastful grin. "A king can walk into death and not be touched." Nervous laughter ripples through the group. He smiles, basking in their uneasy admiration, and then the disaster strikes. It happens suddenly. Perhaps a hinge has warped over time. Maybe a bolt has slipped loose. Or perhaps it is simply the cruel hand of fate and gravity declaring they have endured enough. The right-hand door creaks forward on its rusty hinge. The prince startles, losing his footing. He stumbles backward, panic flashing across his face, the guests freeze, their breaths caught in their throats, the left door swings shut with heavy finality, just as it was designed to do. There is a sickening sound, a wet crunch of metal biting into flesh, then comes silence, no cries, no screams, only the groan of iron closing in. Time seems to slow as the horrified witnesses try to grasp what has just happened. After several agonizing moments, they force the doors open. But it is too late. The prince is already dying, or perhaps he has already passed away. Two of the shorter spikes, placed near the abdomen, have pierced him clean through. Another spike has broken a rib. Blood drips down the rivets and pools in the grooves like rain running over dark stone. The scholars faint on the spot, overwhelmed by the horror. One nobleman vomits discreetly into his hat. The servants retreat in silence, faces drained of color, and the Iron Maiden? She stands there, serene and impassive, closed once again as if awaiting her next victim. Removing the prince's body becomes a grim and difficult task. The coroner, a man who once dabbled in poetry, later describes the scene as a tango of rust and bone. The Iron Maiden is sealed and locked the following day. A priest hurriedly performs an exorcism over the device. Later, a traveling friar condemns it as the devil's wardrobe. Historians continue to debate whether the prince's death was a tragic accident or a carefully planned suicide. Some argue that Janos had become dangerously obsessed with pain. Others believe he was attempting to demonstrate a philosophical point about fear, miscalculation, and the dangers of overconfidence. One particularly dark theory, popular among certain academic circles, suggests something more sinister, that a rival nobleman tampered with the hinge, turning the prince's fascination into a fatal trap. This theory claims his death was not a folly but a murder disguised in the cruel language of gears and pressure plates. Yet no charges were ever brought, and no inquiry ever yielded a definitive conclusion. All that remained, in the end, was the Iron Maiden itself. Eventually, the device was dismantled. Its parts were melted down. Legend holds that one spike was fashioned into a paperweight for the town magistrate, while another was forged into a key for the castle's wine cellar, a bitter irony that no one failed to notice. But the story did not die with the prince, it became a legend. A dark fable about a man killed by his own collection. A ruler so enthralled with spectacle that he ultimately became its final exhibit. In children's stories, he is known simply as the Prince of Thorns. In village rhymes, his memory lingers in lines like these: he opened the door and found his end, a crown of iron, none to mend. What's built for show may bite in kind, and leave the builder trapped behind. You shiver now, but not from fear. It is a quiet shiver, a recognition of the fragile truth hidden deep within the story's teeth. Because this was no punishment. No calculated plot. It was a death born from design. And how often does that happen? How many people build lives around obsessions that become prisons? Castles made of dreams that slowly become cages. Machines crafted with care, believed never to betray, until the day they turn against their makers. But not you, your bed is soft beneath you. Your choices are gentle and kind. You do not feel trapped. You are free, you listen to the quiet hum of the night, the silence that fills the spaces between candle flickers, and the slow fading of blood and iron into forgotten memory, and somewhere beneath it all, you hear the faint creak of a hinge that will never close again. The echo of the Emperor's last words fades away into the stillness that now surrounds you. You find yourself in a quieter chamber, one that is dim and hushed, caught somewhere between the deepening dusk and the edge of midnight. This place is tucked within a warm, walled city of the ancient East. Perhaps it is Samarkand, or maybe Lahore, or even a ghostly court hidden deep within the ruins of a crumbling Mughal palace. The air is thick with the scent of rosewater mingled with the faint aroma of dying marigolds. The carpets beneath your feet are worn thin by countless footsteps over the centuries, stretching beneath gilded arches that reach up toward the heavens. From the balcony nearby, The soft breeze carries the distant murmur of a call to prayer, weaving through the night air alongside something else, something more urgent and far more final. Within this serene yet heavy atmosphere, Emperor Jalaluddin reclines against cushions of rich silk. He is old now. Not yet ancient, not frail or feeble, but old enough that his joints ache and each breath does not come as easily as it once did. Still, he carries himself with the dignity of a true monarch. His eyes remain fierce and commanding. His beard is trimmed with exacting care, and when he speaks, his voice is slow but firm, steady with the weight of authority. Yet tonight, despite this proud exterior, there is a tremble in his hand and a quietness deep within his bones that had not been there before. He has summoned the two most powerful tribal warlords of his fractured dominion. For years these men have fought each other relentlessly, clashing at the borders, setting fire to fields, abducting sons, and whispering threats and assassination plots under the cover of night. The emperor, once too proud to interfere in these brutal squabbles, has finally reached a breaking point. He will not die with his empire torn apart by internal strife. Tonight, he demands an audience. There will be no scribes to record every word, no guards lining the halls to enforce decorum. Only the three of them stand together, the emperor and the two warlords, with the heavy weight of history pressing down upon their shoulders. They meet beneath a great blue-tiled dome, in a marble hall whose floor shines cold beneath their feet. Lanterns glow softly around the room, casting warm pools of gold light across the elaborate mosaics decorating the walls and ceiling. The emperor wears robes of pure white, edged with delicate lapis lazuli trim. A single emerald ring, a precious gift from a long-dead queen, glimmers on his finger. His attendants bring in cups of fragrant tea. Then quietly slip away without a sound, leaving the men alone. The conversation begins gently, carefully, each word weighed as if a single wrong syllable might ignite the tinderbox of long-held grudges and violence. There is a formality to the exchange, a ritual respect underscored by the tension that hums just beneath the surface. After a moment of silence, the emperor takes a deep breath and makes his proposal, an accord of land and tribute, marriage alliances and mercy granted. The two warlords nod slowly, reluctantly accepting this fragile hope for peace. After so many years of feuding, the very idea of peace feels heavier, more complex than war itself. Then, the emperor smiles. He opens his arms wide and says, "Let us not shake hands like merchants, nor bow like servants. Let us seal this peace with the honor of brothers." The two men hesitate. This gesture was not part of the original plan. Yet, despite their doubt, they step forward, one to the emperor's left, the other to his right. The first places a hand over his heart, bows deeply, and then gently presses his lips to the emperor's cheek. The second warlord follows, mirroring the solemn and deliberate gesture. The moment stretches long and slow, ceremonious and ancient in its significance. And then something subtle, something soft, breaks. The emperor winces. His hand instinctively flies up to his face. He blinks rapidly, but no sound escapes his lips. His chest begins to rise and fall far too quickly. He tries to straighten, to steady himself. But one foot slips. He falters, then stumbles backward, his eyes roll upward, and his mouth parts for one final breath, and then he collapses, silent and still, between the two warlords. The warlords freeze, stunned by the suddenness of the collapse. One of them calls out urgently for help. The other kneels beside the emperor, reaching for his wrist, but finds it limp and lifeless. The emperor is already gone. His eyes remain half open. And his mouth is frozen in the middle of the peaceful kiss. Within moments, the court physician arrives, pale and breathless. He kneels beside the fallen monarch, placing fingers delicately against the emperor's throat to search for a pulse. His voice is thick with disbelief when he finally speaks. A rupture. A swelling deep in the cheek, just beneath the temple. Pressed too hard, burst inward. The warlords exchange glances, trying to grasp the meaning. "You mean," one finally asks in a hushed tone. he was killed by a kiss? The physician nods slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. Historians have debated the exact details ever since. Was it an aneurysm, a silent killer that had been growing for months, waiting for just the wrong amount of pressure to release its fatal blow? Or was it an abscess, a hidden pocket of infection nestled behind bone and sinew, aching silently until a gentle touch turned deadly? Perhaps the emperor had been ill all along, simply choosing that precise moment to fall, some whisper of poison. That one of those kisses was tainted, carrying death not through blade or arrow, but through skin and breath. Yet no evidence was ever found. No assassin ever stepped forward to confess. And no one dared openly accuse either warlord, at least not aloud. Whatever the truth may be, the symbolism was too powerful to ignore. The emperor, a ruler who commanded not just with words but with silence, gesture, and the gravity of his presence, was brought down not by betrayal, but by a show of peace. Not by a weapon, but by ritual. Not by hatred, but by affection. The irony echoed like a distant drumbeat through every hallway of the empire. The two warlords were never the same after that night. They honored the agreement, even expanding it in time. Yet they never again stood shoulder to shoulder, nor allowed their cheeks to touch in such intimacy. One is said to have refused to sit for portraits after the event, terrified that the memory of that kiss would summon ghosts from his past. The emperor was buried in the quietest corner of the royal gardens, beneath the shade of jasmine trees and beneath an inscription that read simply, "He embraced the world and the world pressed back." Servants who had known the emperor in his final days whispered that his last year was filled with dreams of softness. He was lonely, they said, always watching the door, always sleeping near open windows, listening for the distant sounds of a people he no longer touched. The kiss, when it finally came, was both a gift and an ending. Now you lie still yourself, the cool sheets brushing softly against your skin. There are no visitors here, no whispers of politics, no trembling rituals in the night. Just the steady rhythm of your own breath, and the quiet reminder that sometimes the human body, so soft, so fragile, so full of hope, simply cannot bear the weight of what it yearns for most. And so, you release this emperor too, his palace, his ring, and his final piece all fall away into the night. You close your eyes, and no one leans in. The jasmine trees slowly vanish from view, and with their fading goes the lingering memory of that tender kiss, the profound silence, and the quiet dignity of a man undone not by violence or treachery, but by something infinitely softer and more fragile. Now the scent hanging in the air shifts dramatically, moving away from the delicate sweetness of flowers to something sharper and earthier, spiced roasted meat, the unmistakable musk of sweat from horses, and the pungent, fermented tang of barley brewing in large wooden vats. You find yourself in a very different place again, somewhere colder, yet paradoxically alive with celebration and movement. Colorful banners flutter high overhead. Torches blaze brightly along tall timber walls, and the faint sound of lively music drifts in from somewhere distant, yet it is unmistakably there. You have arrived at a royal wedding. But not just any wedding. This is the grand occasion of the wedding of King Sigurd, known far and wide as Sigurd the Jovial. Yes, that was the name they gave him, not because the king was particularly gifted with humor or witty tales, nor because he spun great stories that held a crowd rapt. No, it was because he laughed. Constantly. Without restraint. Loudly. At everything and anything. His laugh was a force of nature, a sound that could end bitter arguments, unsettle the most serious of ambassadors. And, as many claimed, even startle and kill birds mid-flight. He truly believed that joy itself was a kind of strength. A kingdom ruled with laughter and mirth, he often said, was unshakable, no matter the storms that might batter it. And on this night, the king is very, very merry indeed. You watch him seated at the head of the great hall, the golden crown perched on his head a little crooked, lending him a roguish air. In his hand he holds a drinking horn, carved intricately with scenes depicting mythical beasts locked in fierce battle and heroic deeds of old. Beside him sits his bride, a woman at least 30 years his junior. She looks overwhelmed, her eyes wide and uncertain, but not a single soul in the hall dares mention her discomfort, not even she dares to say a word. The grand feast has already been in full swing for some time, and the wine flows freely, like a roaring river rushing through the spring thaw. The tables groan beneath the weight of sumptuous food, roasted boar with crispy crackling, trout stuffed with tart cranberries, stewed apples simmered with spices, and thick pepper cake still warm from the oven. The fire in the hearth roars, sending flickers of orange light dancing along the walls. Somewhere up in the rafters, a cat gives chase to a startled bird that almost certainly regrets having flown indoors at the worst possible moment. King Sigurd is in the middle of delivering a toast, his fifth one of the evening. He rises to his feet, waving the drinking horn in the air, his cheeks flushed with drink and merriment. His eyes shine bright and alive with mischief as he begins to speak. It is difficult to tell what his words are about, whether love, or war, or even ducks, as his speech is punctuated by frequent hiccups, and then it happens, he laughs, not just a simple chuckle or a soft breathy wheeze, but a full-throated, booming laugh that shakes the very rafters of the hall. It is a laugh so thunderous it makes goblets tremble on the tables. He throws his head back, mouth wide open, and his chest heaves with the force of his laughter. He laughs so hard, that he swallows his own tongue. An unbearable silence falls over the hall. At first, the courtiers assume this is part of the king's well-known antics. Surely, this is one of Sigurd's pranks. After all, this was the man who once faked a fainting spell just to delay a speech about taxes. He had, on another occasion, belched the names of all his horses in order of favoritism. This must surely be another of his jokes. But then the truth becomes chillingly clear, his eyes grow wide with panic, his hands claw wildly at the air as if trying to grasp something invisible. He stumbles forward, losing his balance, and collapses face first into a roasted goose. There is no punchline. There is no laughter now. Chaos erupts instantly. The court physician, a man who is far more accustomed to treating ailments with leeches than dealing with choking emergencies, rushes forward frantically. He slaps the king's back 6 times with no effect. Someone shouts for a bucket of water. Another courtier, desperate, suggests blowing into the king's ears to revive him. No one knows what else to do, but by the time they begin to understand what is happening, it is already too late. King Sigurd does not die in battle, nor does he succumb to plague or pass away peacefully in his bed at a ripe old age. Instead, he dies on his wedding night, struck down by a joke that he never even got to finish. Historians continue to puzzle over the exact details. Could a man truly die from laughter? Could someone really die because of swallowing their own tongue? Most agree it is rare but not impossible. One theory suggests that the king may have suffered a seizure triggered by the overwhelming excitement of the moment. Another hypothesis points to a pre-existing condition, perhaps an unusually shaped epiglottis or a childhood injury that weakened the muscles of his throat, making such a fatal accident possible, but chroniclers quickly embellished the story. One bard claimed that Sigurd laughed so hard that the gods themselves mistook his roar for thunder and struck him down in silence. Another claimed that the final laugh was so powerful it shattered 3 wine glasses on the table and dislodged a mouse from the rafters, sending it scurrying in panic. A jester, later exiled from court for his insolence, simply said, "He died the way he ruled, loud, unexpected, and right in everyone's soup." The queen, now a widow before midnight on her wedding day, soon returned to her family estate. She remarried later, choosing a much quieter man who abhorred banquets and loud celebrations. As for King Sigurd, he was buried with a smile on his face, literally. The mortician, with a touch that many would call ghoulish, repositioned his features so that even in death, the king appeared as though he had just heard something hilarious. His tombstone bears this inscription: "Here lies Sigurd the Jovial, who found the end of the joke," and yet, despite the laughter and the tragedy, the message lingers long after. That joy, when taken to the extreme, can tip over into absurdity. That even happiness, when unchecked and relentless, has a breaking point. And that a ruler, for all his power and command, is still just one misplaced breath away from falling. You smile now, not too widely, just enough, because you have felt that laugh before, have you not? The laugh that bubbles up deep in your chest, shaking your ribs, leaving you breathless. The laugh that reminds you, fiercely, that you are alive. But also that life itself is fragile, always so very close to slipping away, so you pull the blanket tighter around yourself. You let your breathing slow and even out. And you let Sigurd rest, still chuckling somewhere out there in the ether, just far enough away that you can finally fall asleep without the fear of joining him mid-laugh. The laughter drifts away, fading into the distance until it is replaced by a profound stillness so deep and heavy that it feels capable of cradling entire centuries within its silence. You slowly open your eyes in the dim, flickering half-light of a small chapel illuminated only by the soft glow of candle flames. For a brief moment, it seems as though time itself has halted completely, suspended in this quiet place. The narrow windows, mere slits carved into thick stone walls, allow only faint traces of pale daylight to enter. The air is thick with the mingled scents of melted wax, cold damp stone, and a faint trace of incense long burned out. There, laid out with a haunting stillness upon an ornately carved marble slab, lies the pale and motionless body of a young monarch who should never have died at all. This is Crown Prince Theodore of Anjou. He is barely 16 years old. His golden curls frame a face as delicate and fragile as fine parchment. A boy who had been raised with every expectation to become a legend. A future king destined to rule with wisdom and valor. But instead, his end was a tragedy far more heartbreaking than heroic. So senseless was his passing that even the gravediggers tasked with his burial shook their heads in disbelief. You rewind the hours that led to this moment. You are no longer standing in the crypt but instead find yourself in the bustling royal kitchens of the palace. The morning of the prince's coronation feast has just begun. Trumpets have been polished to gleaming brass and ready to sound their heralds. White doves have been carefully prepared for a grand release to mark the celebrations. Every detail of the ceremony has been meticulously planned down to the very minute. And Theodore himself is in remarkably good spirits, nervous, yes, but excited and bright-eyed, still giddy with the innocent dreams of a boy who believes that wearing a crown will make everyone admire and like him. As a final, special treat before the day's official events begin, the head chef carefully presents something extraordinary, a perfectly crafted marzipan swan. This is no ordinary dessert. It is a long-standing tradition in the House of Anjou. The swan is painstakingly sculpted from almond paste, sugar, and rosewater, shaped into the elegant form of a swan caught mid-flight, its wings gracefully arched and each feather painstakingly pinched and detailed by hand. It is far more than just a confection. It is a symbol representing grace, sovereignty, and purity. Princes are meant to eat these swans at their coronations to show that they have become the kingdom's protector, the guardian of all its people. Theodore, with wide eyes shining, smiles as he reaches toward the delicate, fragile neck of the swan, and then he bites into it. Within moments, everything changes, his body stiffens. His fingers curl tightly. His jaw clenches hard. His breath suddenly stops, and then he falls. Panic erupts instantly throughout the kitchens and the adjoining chambers. Physicians rush in, murmuring incantations and bringing their leeches as if hoping old remedies will help this modern crisis. But no method succeeds. The young prince lies dead before his body even reaches the stone flagstones. His coronation robe, richly embroidered and gleaming, lies crumpled beneath him, unsoiled but abandoned. Like a curtain forgotten after a play. Nearby, the marzipan swan remains perfectly intact, mocking in its fragile, elegant beauty. So what happened here? Theories quickly take flight. The official court alchemist insists that the prince suffered a sudden anaphylactic reaction, a fatal nut allergy undiagnosed due to Theodore's sheltered, secluded upbringing. Others whisper that the marzipan itself was deliberately poisoned, laced with bitter almonds containing trace amounts of deadly cyanide. Still others claim it was a simple choking accident, made far worse by royal etiquette. Theodore had been taught never to spit anything out at the table, no matter what, but then, a far darker theory begins to circulate. The swan had not been commissioned by the chef as usual, it had been sent by a foreign dignitary, from a rival duchy known for bitter disputes over trade routes and political influence. Their delegation had insisted on contributing a blessing to the royal feast. The box containing the marzipan arrived sealed and unopened. Pressured by strict protocol and diplomatic courtesy, the chef served the dessert without inspection or hesitation. Historians and scholars still debate this to this day. Was it a carefully planned act of diplomatic sabotage? A fatal mistake born of blind obedience to ceremony? Or simply a devastating coincidence that no one could have foreseen? There was never a trial. No public accusations or punishments. The foreign envoy was quietly escorted from the court before nightfall. Their name was erased from the official records. The head chef retired just 2 days later and was said to have never touched almonds again. The coronation itself was never held. Instead, the kingdom mourned. The cages that had once held doves were draped in black cloth. The orchestra that had rehearsed jubilant fanfares for months instead played somber dirges. A marble statue of a swan, its neck bowed in sorrow, was placed solemnly at the entrance to the crypt, and so, Theodore entered history not as a king, but as a tragic cautionary tale. In poems, he became the boy who choked on grace. In village folklore, he transformed into a ghost haunting bakeries, appearing whenever a dessert seemed too perfect. One chronicler went so far as to blame the death on divine irony, writing, "For who can protect the kingdom if he cannot even chew? But you sit quietly with this image in your mind, a boy filled with dreams and hopes, cruelly struck down not by the sword or by sin, but by something sweet. By something meant to bring delight and joy, you pull your blanket tighter around yourself. Let the soft, warm folds of fabric cocoon you. There are no swans here now. No almond paste. No cold marble slabs or forgotten titles. Only warmth, only peace, only the quiet understanding that some endings, no matter how senseless, still leave behind a story so tender, so poignantly human, that they soften the hard edges of history itself. So you let Theodore go, let the sweetness dissolve, let the crown rest once more upon its velvet cushion, and close your eyes. The sugar slowly fades away. The hard edges of the marble begin to soften in your mind's eye. And now, you find yourself standing beneath the vast, open sky of the Scottish Highlands. Mist curls and drifts lazily over the purple heather and jagged rocks scattered across the landscape. The wind carries the scent of pine trees mingled with something darker, something faintly smoky, or perhaps regretful. The hills around you seem brooding, ancient, and utterly silent, holding their secrets close. Somewhere in the distance, a bagpipe wails a low, mournful tune, its notes stretching out into the cold air like a sorrowful sigh. You follow the sound, drawn like a moth to a flame, until it leads you to a stone keep. Its walls are cracked and covered in thick ivy that twists and crawls over the weathered stones. A banner flutters half-heartedly in the breeze, limp and faded. This is the final scene, the last of the absurd, astonishing, and strangely tender royal endings. Fittingly, it belongs to Queen Mairead of Dunbray, the monarch who died from something so unexpected that no one could have seen it coming. Not even the queen herself. Her reign was long and stable, though, if we are honest, it had been a little dull. Mairead was known for her impeccable manners and her icy stare that could chill even the most daring courtiers. Throughout her rule, she maintained a strict campaign against uncivil noises. Thunderstorms were met with drawn curtains to muffle their roar. The castle blacksmith, whose hammer once rang loud and steady, was relocated beyond the city walls to prevent the clangor from disturbing her peace. Once, she even banned cabbage from the royal kitchens not because of the taste, but because of its notorious tendency to produce unseemly sounds at the dinner table. Yet beneath her severe exterior, Mairead harbored a secret passion. She adored riddles. Books filled with them, ancient scrolls that curled with age, and visitors who came bearing fresh puzzles were welcomed eagerly. All who wished to speak with her were required to present a new riddle before they were granted an audience. She kept a riddle master on her payroll to entertain and challenge her mind. Each year, on the solstice, she hosted a grand festival of puzzles. The castle would transform into a labyrinth of clues, chests that required cunning to open, trick doors, and contests where gold-threaded cloaks were awarded to the cleverest minds. Then, one year, on the eve of her 60th birthday, she declared her greatest challenge yet: "Whosoever brings me a riddle I cannot answer," she proclaimed to her court, "shall be made first scholar of the realm and granted land, title, and my personal thanks." This challenge was not a trap but a genuine test of wit. Then came a stranger, young, ragged, sharp-eyed. Perhaps a foreigner, or perhaps a trickster sent by fate itself. He bowed low, offering no name, and whispered the riddle straight into her ear. No one else heard the words. The queen blinked, her composure faltering for the first time in years. She leaned back, her brow furrowing deeply. Then her eyes lifted, wide and startled. And then, an expression no one had seen in years appeared on her face: fear. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask for clarification or a hint. But she froze, her eyes fluttered as if caught between two worlds, her chest stuttered, struggling to draw breath, and then it stopped altogether. The court physician was summoned immediately, arriving within minutes, but Mairead was already gone. There was no wound, no poison, no sign of trauma. Just gone. A post-mortem revealed a massive, sudden heart attack caused by a single clot. Nothing could have saved her. But the timing was so perfect. So cruel. So final. She was killed by a riddle she could not solve. The stranger vanished before dawn. Some claimed he dissolved into mist. Others said he simply walked out the front gate without ever looking back. No one ever learned what the riddle was. One servant swore he heard the queen mutter a phrase with her last breath, something along the lines of "it has no answer." Another claimed to have seen her smile faintly, a small laugh escaping her lips just before she collapsed. Historians continue to debate: was it coincidence? The stress of old age? Or had the riddle struck so deeply, so personally, that her mind and heart cracked in the same moment? The truth remains buried beneath layers of legend. What we do know is this: the throne of riddles was dismantled. Her beloved puzzle books were sealed away. And a stone plaque was placed in the castle courtyard, etched with one final, haunting question: what walks without legs, answers without voice, and ends every story without lifting a sword? They say no one has solved it, and perhaps that is the point, because death, in the end, is not always the villain. Sometimes it is the punchline, the twist in the tale, the answer you never expect but somehow always feel coming. You sit quietly now, letting go, of the swan, of the jester king, of the emperor and his cheek, of the queen and her fatal curiosity. History has stilled, the absurd has faded, and now, only the wind remains soft. Endless, curling beneath your door like a whisper. Wind down, so here we are again. Quiet once more. The fire beside you has burned low and is now little more than glowing embers. The last page of this peculiar chronicle has turned. All those strange and unexpected deaths, the ones that made you blink in surprise or smile in disbelief or sigh with a bittersweet ache, have finally folded themselves into stillness. You have wandered through grand banquet halls and beneath iron tombs. You have witnessed kings slipping on laughter and queens falling into silence. You have seen, time and again, how even the weight of a crown cannot stop the body from being soft, fragile, strange, or suddenly undone. But now, there is no crown here, no feast laid out in golden platters. No sword raised in final challenge, no riddle to solve before the dawn. There is only you, and breath, and rest. Your body sinks deeper into the mattress beneath you, the tension unraveling slowly, little by little, like a thread slipping free from a worn spindle. Your hands grow warm and relaxed. Your thoughts dim gently, like a flickering torchlight hidden behind thick curtains. Tonight, there is no need to solve anything, no need to rule, to wonder, or to guess. You are not a monarch, You do not have to impress a court or make treaties before morning light. You can simply lie here, wrapped in your own soft sheets, in your own quiet world, and let these stories melt away into dreams. Whatever awaits you tomorrow, the errands, the headlines, the noisy neighbors, those things are miles away now. Let them stay there, far from this moment. Tonight, your kingdom is small, and safe, and still, so close your eyes, let your jaw unclench, let the laugh that never came finally drift quietly into the dark. You made it, you survived all 20 deaths, now, let go, and sleep.